Hello and welcome to Black Magic, your home for amazing stories. Today's story is what if Harry absorbed Voldemort's full power through the scar at age 3 and became darker than the Dark Lord himself. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoy it, and subscribe if you haven't already. We post new stories regularly. Let's get started. Chapter 1, The Awakening. Little Harry Potter bolted upright in his cupboard, his tiny 3-year-old body drenched in cold sweat. The nightmare had been different this time, not the usual flash of green light and woman's scream. No, tonight something had broken through. His scar burned white-hot, like someone was pressing a poker against his forehead. Harry bit his lip to keep from screaming, tasting blood as the pain intensified to an unbearable peak. Then, suddenly, it was as if a dam burst inside his head. Knowledge. Memories. Power. All flooded into him at once. Harry gasped, clutching his head as images flashed before his eyes, spells, incantations, faces of people he'd never met, places he'd never seen. A castle. A snake. A skull with a serpent tongue. Blood and screams and triumph. Decades of experiences that weren't his own poured into his small body. When it finally stopped, Harry sat perfectly still in the darkness, breathing heavily. He was still Harry, but he was also someone else. Someone called Tom. Someone called Voldemort. Mine now, he whispered, his child's voice somehow carrying a new weight. All mine. 7-year-old Harry Potter smiled politely as Mrs. Fig rambled on about her cats, but behind his eyes, calculations were spinning. The squib didn't realize what he was, what he'd become. No one did. Not Dumbledore, not the Ministry, not the Death Eaters still in hiding. For 4 years now, he'd been carefully practicing, quietly exploring the vast repository of magical knowledge that lived inside his head. The memories weren't always clear, like watching a movie with scenes missing, but the magical theory, the spells, the techniques were all there. "Would you like more tea, Harry?" Mrs. Fig asked. "Yes, please," Harry answered, his voice childishly sweet. When she turned to the kettle, he flicked his finger slightly, wandlessly warming the liquid as she poured. She didn't notice her tea kettle hadn't been on the stove. They never noticed the small things. He'd learned quickly that overt displays would attract attention. Instead, he practiced subtle control, moving objects centimeters at a time, influencing emotions slightly, listening to conversations through walls. The discipline of Tom Riddle merged with the innovative instincts of Harry Potter had created something new. As Mrs. Fig turned back, Harry's expression was perfectly innocent. Inside, he was planning his next move. "Boy! Get down here now!" Uncle Vernon's voice thundered up the stairs. 10-year-old Harry closed the book he'd been reading, a boring children's story he'd checked out as cover for the advanced mathematics text he'd transfigured it into. The Dursleys never noticed the switch. They never noticed much about him anymore, not since he'd started subtly influencing their behavior. Harry descended the stairs calmly, finding Vernon purple-faced and holding a letter. "Explain this." Vernon thrust a phone bill forward, jabbing his fat finger at international charges. Harry tilted his head slightly. "I haven't used the phone, Uncle Vernon. Don't lie to me." Petunia and Dudley were at the shops when these calls were made. "Who were you calling in bloody Albania?" Harry looked directly into Vernon's eyes and pushed a gentle compulsion with his words. "Check the dates again. I was at school then. Remember? You drove me yourself." Vernon's eyes glazed slightly. I drove you." "It must be a billing error," Harry suggested softly. "You should call and complain. They might give you a discount." The idea of saving money cleared Vernon's confusion immediately. "Right. Bloody phone company trying to cheat decent people." As Vernon stomped off to make his complaint call, Harry smiled slightly. The Albanian contact had been worth the risk, an old associate of Voldemort's with access to certain rare magical texts. Harry was building his network carefully, using Muggle means that wizards would never trace or suspect. He'd spent years preparing. His letter would arrive soon. Hogwarts wouldn't know what hit it. Slytherin, the Sorting Hat called out after barely touching Harry's head. The Great Hall fell silent for a moment before whispers erupted. The boy who lived, in Slytherin. Harry stood calmly, handed the hat back to a shocked McGonagall, and walked confidently toward the green and silver table. He noted Dumbledore's penetrating gaze following him, the old wizard's expression unreadable. Let him wonder, Harry thought. Let them all wonder. The Slytherins regarded him with suspicious curiosity as he took a seat. Draco Malfoy, whom Harry had deliberately avoided on the train, looked particularly conflicted. Potter, Malfoy finally said, didn't expect to see you here. Harry smiled coolly. Expectations are often misleading, aren't they? I've found that people see what they want to see. Several older Slytherins exchanged glances. There was something off about Potter's speech, too articulate, too measured for an 11-year-old raised by Muggles. By dessert, Harry had identified the power players at the table. He spoke little but observed everything, who deferred to whom, who tried to hide their intelligence, who watched others instead of talking. The hierarchy was obvious to him in a way Voldemort had always understood social dynamics. Later that night, as the first-year boys settled into their dormitory, Theodore Nott approached Harry's bed. My father said you're dangerous, Nott said quietly. That you destroyed the Dark Lord as a baby. Harry looked up from the book he was reading. And what do you think, Theodore? The boy seemed surprised to be asked his opinion. I think, if you did that as a baby, what can you do now? Harry's smile didn't reach his eyes. That's the interesting question, isn't it? He returned to his book, dismissing Nott, who backed away with a troubled expression. In the bed closest to the door, Draco Malfoy listened intently, his mind racing with implications and possibilities. Mr. Potter, stay after class please, Professor Snape said as students packed up their potion supplies. The first week of classes had been exactly what Harry expected, teachers covering basic material he'd already mastered years ago through his acquired memories and private study. He'd been careful to perform just above average in most classes, not wanting to attract too much attention too quickly. With Snape, however, he'd made a calculated choice to demonstrate more ability. The potions master was too observant to fool for long, and Harry needed to establish a different dynamic than the one Snape had planned based on his hatred for James Potter. When the classroom emptied, Snape closed the door with a flick of his wand and cast privacy charms. His black eyes studied Harry with cold intensity. Your potion today was perfect, Snape said flatly. Not merely adequate or even good. Perfect. The work of someone with years of experience. Harry met his gaze calmly. Thank you, Professor. It wasn't a compliment, Potter. It was an observation. An impossibility. Is it impossible that I read ahead and practiced? Harry asked innocently. Snape's eyes narrowed. Don't play games. The technique you used to crush those scorpion tails isn't in the textbook. It's a modification I developed myself years ago. Harry allowed a small smile. Perhaps great minds think alike, Professor. Snape moved closer, looming over Harry. What are you? The question hung in the air between them. Harry felt Snape's mind gently probing at his mental barriers, barriers that no child should have. He allowed Snape to feel them without revealing their full extent. Just a student eager to learn, sir, Harry replied. Then, dropping his innocent act momentarily, he added in a much colder tone, though I suggest asking permission before attempting to enter someone's mind. Some might consider it rude. Snape jerked back as if slapped. How, may I go to dinner now, Professor? Harry's voice was childlike again. I'm quite hungry. Snape stared at him for a long moment before nodding stiffly. As Harry reached the door, Snape called out, Potter. Watch yourself carefully in this house. Slytherin respects power, but it devours the weak, and punishes the arrogant. Harry turned back, his green eyes suddenly much older than his years. I'm counting on it, Professor. By Halloween, Harry had established himself as an enigma in Slytherin House. He excelled in classes without showing off, answered questions when called upon but rarely volunteered, and demonstrated magic that was precise rather than flashy. More importantly, he'd begun building his first circle of allies. Not friends. Harry wasn't interested in friendship as most children understood it. He wanted loyalty, usefulness, and complementary skills. Blaise Zabini appreciated Harry's political instincts. Theodore Nott valued his willingness to discuss deeper magical theory. Even Draco Malfoy had begun orbiting closer, drawn by Harry's casual references to obscure pureblood customs that someone raised by Muggles shouldn't know. Most surprising to the school was his connection to Hermione Granger, the brilliant Muggle-born Gryffindor. After the troll incident, which Harry had used as an opportunity to demonstrate his magical prowess away from teachers' eyes, she had attached herself to him despite house rivalries. You don't actually like the know-it-all, do you? Draco asked one evening in the common room. Harry looked up from his ancient runes text, a third-year subject he was studying, for fun. Like is irrelevant. Hermione has the highest raw intelligence in our year and an eidetic memory. She's useful. Draco frowned. She's a mudball. Harry's magic flared visibly for just an instant, making the candles flicker throughout the common room. Several older students looked over in alarm. Blood prejudice is lazy thinking, Draco, Harry said calmly, though his eyes had hardened. Voldemort himself was a half-blood, you know. The common room went deadly silent at Harry's casual use of the Dark Lord's name. That's a lie, hissed a sixth year from across the room. Harry smiled coldly. His real name was Tom Marvolo Riddle. His father was a Muggle from Little Hangleton. His mother was Mara P. Gaunt, last of a once noble line reduced to poverty and madness from inbreeding. You can verify it if you don't believe me. The silence deepened as students exchanged worried glances. No one asked how an 11-year-old Harry Potter could possibly know this information. The point, Harry continued, looking back at Draco, is that I judge people by their power and usefulness, not their blood. I suggest you learn to do the same if you want to survive what's coming. What's coming? Draco asked, both afraid and intrigued. Harry just smiled and returned to his book. Ah, the headmaster returns, Harry murmured, watching as Dumbledore slipped back into the Great Hall during the Christmas feast. The old wizard caught his eye across the room and gave a slight nod. Harry returned it with a knowing smile. The stone had been moved 3 times since term began, each location more heavily warded than the last. Harry had tracked its movements out of curiosity rather than interest in the stone itself. Immortality held little appeal when you had better plans for longevity. What are you plotting now, Potter? Blaise asked, noticing the exchange. Just observing the game board, Harry replied. The headmaster thinks he's setting a trap. For who? He believes there's a threat to something hidden in the castle. He's not wrong, but he's watching the wrong piece. Blaise looked troubled. You talk like this is all some kind of chess match. Harry speared a roast potato with his fork. Life is a chess match, Blaise. Most people just don't realize they're pieces rather than players. After dinner, Harry wasn't surprised to find a note requesting his presence in the headmaster's office. He'd been expecting this conversation since September. Acid pops, he told the gargoyle, which leapt aside. As he rode the spiral staircase upward, Harry carefully arranged his mental defenses, preparing for the delicate dance ahead. Ah, Harry, thank you for coming, Dumbledore said warmly when Harry entered. Please, have a seat. Lemon drop? No thank you, headmaster. Harry sat, taking in the office with apparent childish wonder while actually checking for magical monitoring devices. He spotted several, including one focused specifically on his scar. Interesting. I realized, to my shame, that we haven't had a proper chat since your arrival, Dumbledore said, eyes twinkling. How are you finding Hogwarts? It feels like home, Harry answered truthfully. Though I admit, I wasn't expecting Slytherin. Dumbledore's expression grew more serious. Yes, Professor Snape has mentioned you seem unusually comfortable there. Your parents were both in Gryffindor, you know. So I've heard. But the hat was quite insistent. May I ask what it said to you? Harry tilted his head slightly. It said I had unprecedented potential, and that Slytherin would help me become what I was meant to be. This wasn't entirely false. The hat had actually been terrified, recognizing the merged consciousness within Harry's mind and desperately whispering, "What are you?" before hastily shouting, "Slytherin," and begging to be removed. Dumbledore steepled his fingers. "Harry, I've noticed you seem remarkably advanced for your age. Your professors report spell work and theoretical understanding beyond many third years." Harry gave a practiced, modest shrug. "I read a lot before coming to Hogwarts. The Dursleys didn't give me many other options for entertainment." "Ah yes, your relatives. How was your childhood with them?" Dumbledore's eyes had intensified their twinkle, a sure sign he was probing lightly at Harry's mental shields. "They provided food and shelter," Harry answered neutrally, allowing Dumbledore to sense some genuine childhood neglect while hiding the darker truth, how he'd gradually bent the Dursleys to his will through subtle magical manipulation. "Nothing unusual ever happened at home? No strange incidents?" Dumbledore pressed. Harry feigned confusion. "You mean accidental magic?" "A few times, I suppose. Nothing major." The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, Dumbledore probing gently, Harry deflecting politely. Both knew it was a test of sorts. Both pretended it was just a friendly chat. As Harry rose to leave, Dumbledore asked one final question. "Harry, do you ever have dreams about Voldemort?" Harry allowed genuine surprise to show on his face. "The man who killed my parents?" "No, sir." "Should I?" Dumbledore studied him for a long moment. "No, my boy. I'm glad to hear it. Good night, Harry." "Good night, Professor." As Harry descended the stairs, he smiled to himself. Round 1 to him. By the end of first year, Harry had firmly established his position at Hogwarts. To the teachers, he was a prodigy but not suspiciously so, excelling in theory and practical work but still demonstrating occasional childish enthusiasm or mistakes. To his housemates, he was someone to be respected and, increasingly, followed. His inner circle had grown to include not just Slytherins but selected students from other houses, Hermione from Gryffindor, Terry Boot from Ravenclaw, and Susan Bones from Hufflepuff. Each brought unique connections and abilities. When Professor Quirrell revealed himself as hosting a shade of Voldemort and attempted to steal the Philosopher's Stone, Harry didn't interfere directly. He'd known about Quirrell's passenger since their first handshake, when he'd felt the unmistakable resonance between the fragment in his scar and the wraith possessing the defense teacher. Instead, Harry anonymously tipped off both Snape and Dumbledore, then watched from the shadows as they confronted and defeated the possessed professor. The shade fled, believing Harry to be just an unusually talented child who had somehow survived its attack as an infant. Let the remnant think that, Harry mused as he watched the black mist escape from Quirrell's dying body. Better that no one knows what really happened that night in the nursery. Not yet. On the Hogwarts Express heading home, Hermione sat across from Harry in the compartment he'd claimed, her expression troubled. "Harry," she said hesitantly, "there's something different about you." "Different from other first years?" Harry raised an eyebrow. "I should hope so. Mediocrity isn't something I aspire to. That's not what I mean." She leaned forward, lowering her voice despite the privacy charms he'd already cast. "Sometimes when you think no one's watching, you look older. Like there's someone else looking out through your eyes." Harry went still. Hermione was dangerously perceptive, one of the reasons he'd cultivated her despite the social complications of befriending a Gryffindor Muggleborn. Perhaps I simply had to grow up faster than most, he suggested. It's more than that. She bit her lip. The things you know, not just from books. The way you handle people. It's like you've had decades of experience, not 11 years. Harry studied her for a long moment, weighing options. Finally, he asked, if that were true, would it frighten you? Hermione didn't flinch. It should, shouldn't it? But it doesn't. That's what scares me. Harry smiled, a genuine smile, rare for him. You're asking dangerous questions, Hermione. The kind that change the person who learns the answers. I still want to know. Perhaps someday. He turned to look out the window at the passing countryside. When you're ready to accept that the world isn't divided into good people and Death Eaters. Hermione sat back, frowning. Is that what this is about? Dark magic? Harry laughed softly. It's about power. Who has it, who wants it, and what they're willing to do to get it. He turned back to her. I have plans for this summer. Would you like to be part of them? The abrupt change of subject threw her, but her curiosity won out. What kind of plans? The kind that require a brilliant mind unbound by traditional thinking. His green eyes held hers. The kind that will change everything, eventually. After a moment's hesitation, Hermione nodded. Yes. I'm in. Harry's smile widened. Excellent. I'll owl you next week. As the train neared London, he added casually, oh, and Hermione. Don't mention our arrangement to anyone. Some wouldn't understand the educational opportunities I'm offering. The slight flush on her cheeks told him she'd caught his double meaning. Good. Let her think his interest was partly romantic, it would strengthen her loyalty while he assessed her true potential. As the train pulled into King's Cross, Harry gathered his things and prepared for a summer that would advance his plans significantly. The Dursleys would be providing him with a base of operations, whether they realized it or not. The old protections around Privet Drive would serve his purposes nicely. Year 1 had been about observation and positioning. Year 2 would be about expansion and the first real demonstrations of power. By the time Dumbledore realized what was truly happening, it would be far too late to stop it. Summer arrived with sweltering heat, but Harry remained cool in the air-conditioned comfort of the Dursleys' home, a comfort they provided without question now. His relatives moved around him like planets orbiting a sun, careful never to disturb his activities or question his comings and goings. In his expanded bedroom, formerly Dudley's second bedroom but now magically enlarged to 3 times its original size, Harry sat cross-legged on the floor, eyes closed in concentration. Around him, objects floated in perfect concentric circles, books, quills, small daggers, vials of potions ingredients. Each item rotated slowly, maintaining exact distance from the others. This wasn't just showing off. It was precision training, maintaining multiple magical effects simultaneously while keeping part of his mind engaged in other activities. Currently, that activity was mental communication with a snake curled on his lap. The ministry man came again. Harry hissed in Parseltongue. Yes, replied the small grass snake he'd named Naby. Watched the house from across the street. Left after the sun was highest. Harry nodded slightly, not breaking his concentration on the floating objects. Dumbledore was having him watched, as expected. The old wizard was cautious but not yet truly suspicious, standard monitoring for the boy who lived, especially after the Quirrell incident. A tap at the window interrupted his thoughts. A regal eagle owl hovered outside, carrying a letter in its beak. Without opening his eyes, Harry flicked a finger to unlatch and open the window. The owl swooped in, dropped the letter on his bed, and perched on the specially installed stand near his desk. Only when the snake finished its report did Harry gradually lower all the floating objects to their proper places and open his eyes. Another flick of his finger summoned the letter to his hand, a response from Lucius Malfoy to his carefully crafted inquiry. Dear Mr. Potter, your interest in the historical governance of Hogwarts is both surprising and refreshing in one so young. The Board of Governors does indeed maintain the original charter, including the founders' protocols you inquired about. While these ancient provisions are rarely invoked, they remain binding magical law. Should you wish to discuss these matters further, perhaps you might join our family for tea during the August celestial alignment. Draco speaks highly of your scholarly pursuits. Respectfully, Lucius Malfoy. Harry smiled. Lucius was intrigued enough to invite him to the manor, despite his history as Voldemort's vanquisher. The pure-blood lord had taken the bait, Harry's subtle hint that he knew ways to manipulate Hogwarts' ancient magic that could benefit those on the board. He didn't need Lucius specifically, but the man's connections and position would accelerate certain plans. The August date was also perfect, aligning with a ritual Harry had been preparing for that would strengthen his magical core by harmonizing the absorbed Voldemort essence more fully with his own native magic. A second owl arrived as he was penning his response, this one carrying Hermione's familiar neat handwriting. Harry, I've completed the research you requested. The Department of Magical Education does maintain records of accidental magic incidents, but they're sealed until the witch or wizard turns 17. However, I found a loophole in the Freedom of Magical Information Act of 1968 that might give us access through a third-party educational request. More interestingly, I discovered references to something called the Register, that apparently records all magical births in Britain automatically. The book itself is kept in the Department of Mysteries, but annual statistical reports are filed with the Wisengamot Records Office, accessible to the public. My parents have agreed to take us to London next Tuesday. Meet at the Leaky Cauldron at 10 a.m. Also, I've been thinking about what you said on the train. About power. I'm not sure I agree with your perspective, but I can't stop thinking about it. There's so much about the wizarding world that doesn't make sense, why certain magics are forbidden when they could help people, why magical creatures have so few rights, why knowledge is restricted. Maybe you're right that it all comes down to power and who controls it. See you Tuesday, Hermione. Harry's smile widened as he read. Hermione was already starting to question the artificial boundaries of acceptable magic, faster than he'd anticipated. She would be valuable indeed. The register information was also promising. If he could access those records, he could identify magically powerful children before they even received their Hogwarts letters. Early recruitment was key to his long-term strategy. As evening fell, Harry sent off responses to both letters and began preparations for the next phase of his summer activities, a secret visit to Knockturn Alley. He needed certain ingredients that weren't available to first-years through standard suppliers. The magical disguise he developed using a combination of Voldemort's knowledge and his own innovations would make him appear as a nondescript adult wizard. No one would question his presence or remember his face afterward. As he worked, Harry reflected on how far he'd come in just a year. From cautious positioning to active recruitment and research. From hiding his abilities to strategically revealing them to selected individuals. Soon, he would take the first concrete steps toward reshaping magical Britain. Not through the brute force and terror tactics Voldemort had employed, those had ultimately failed, but through knowledge, influence, and carefully cultivated loyalty. Harry Potter wouldn't just surpass the Dark Lord. He would make Voldemort's ambitions look childishly limited by comparison. And unlike Voldemort, he would succeed. Chapter 2, The Ascension. The Hogwarts Express thundered through the Scottish countryside, but in one particular compartment, the air vibrated with a different kind of energy. Harry sat surrounded by his growing inner circle, Hermione, Blaise, Theo, and surprisingly, Draco Malfoy, whose summer correspondence had shifted from reluctant respect to genuine interest in what Harry was building. "So you actually visited Malfoy Manor?" Blaise asked, clearly impressed. Lucius Malfoy doesn't exactly hand out invitations to half-bloods. Harry's lips curved into a small smile. Let's just say I offered some insights into historical magical governance that caught his attention. Draco shifted uncomfortably. Father wouldn't tell me what you two discussed in his study. He just said you were not what he expected and that I should cultivate the relationship carefully. High praise from Lucius, Theo noted, watching Harry with those calculating eyes that made him the most perceptive of the Slytherins. Hermione, who'd spent much of the summer working on Harry's research projects, studied him with a similar intensity. Their trips to various magical archives and bookshops had been productive, but she'd noticed how librarians and shopkeepers who initially questioned a 12-year-old's access to certain materials suddenly became helpful after a few quiet words from Harry. "We should talk about this year's arrangements," Harry said, casually casting wandless privacy charms that made Draco's eyes widen. "I've secured an unused classroom in the East Wing for our private study sessions." "How'd you manage that?" Blaise asked. "Professor Flitwick approved my request for extra practical space. He thinks it's for a charms study group." Hermione frowned slightly. "It is for study, isn't it?" Harry's green eyes met hers. "Of course. Just not limited to the standard curriculum." The train ride continued with discussions of summer discoveries and plans for the coming term. None of them noticed the small, shabby man who passed their compartment twice, pausing each time to stare at Harry with a strange mixture of fear and fascination. "Potter." "A word." Marcus Flint, the hulking Slytherin Quidditch captain, cornered Harry after the welcome feast. The sixth year towered over Harry but seemed oddly hesitant. "Tryouts are Friday. I want you there." Harry raised an eyebrow. "I don't recall expressing interest in Quidditch, Flint." "Snape says you fly. We need a seeker." "Does Snape now?" Harry replied, amused that the professor had been watching him during flying lessons. "And if I'm not interested?" Flint's expression darkened. "Look, Potter, I don't know what game you're playing in the common room, getting all the first years, now second years, to follow you around like you're some kind of prince. But on the pitch, I'm in charge." Harry studied the older boy for a moment, noting the insecurity beneath the bluster. Flint was academically weak but magically strong, a useful combination in the right circumstances. "I'll consider it," Harry finally said. "On one condition." "What?" Flint asked suspiciously. "You let me help you with your transfiguration. I understand you're retaking the year because of failed OWLS." Flint's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "I don't need charity from a second year." "Not charity," Harry said smoothly. "An exchange. Your Quidditch expertise for my academic assistance. And perhaps," he lowered his voice, "access to certain sixth-year privileges. The restricted section, Hogsmeade visits." The older boy's eyes narrowed in calculation. Everyone in Slytherin knew Potter was unnaturally gifted, especially in transfiguration. "Deal," Flint finally grunted. "Friday, 4 p.m. As Flint walked away, Harry smiled. Another piece on his board, positioned exactly where he wanted it. By October, Harry's influence had grown substantially. His study group had expanded to include students from all four houses, an unprecedented social breakthrough that even the teachers had noticed. Officially, they focused on practical defense work that the incompetent new professor, Lockhart, wasn't providing. Unofficially, Harry was identifying and cultivating the most magically talented and politically useful students in the school. "Try again, Neville," Harry instructed as the round-faced Gryffindor struggled with a shield charm. "Visualize the shield as a solid wall of light, not just a barrier." I can't," Neville stammered. "My magic isn't strong enough." Harry moved closer, lowering his voice. "Your magic is stronger than most in this room, Neville. It's your confidence that's weak." "How would you know?" Neville asked, genuinely curious rather than defensive. Harry placed a hand on Neville's shoulder and sent a tiny pulse of his own magic into the boy, just enough to temporarily align their energies. "Feel that? That's your core. Much bigger than you think." Neville's eyes widened as he felt the strange resonance. "How are you doing that?" "Old family magic," Harry lied smoothly. It was actually a technique Voldemort had developed for identifying potential recruits, modified by Harry to be less invasive. Try the shield again. This time, when Neville cast, a solid blue barrier formed in front of him, weaker than Harry's but stronger than most second years could produce. Brilliant, called Susan Bones, who'd been practicing nearby. The Hufflepuff gave Neville an approving smile that made him blush. Harry observed the interaction with satisfaction. Neville's grandmother was on the Wizengamot, and Susan's aunt headed the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. These connections would prove valuable in time. Across the room, Hermione was helping Terry Boot with a modified stunning spell while Blaise and Theo worked with some Ravenclaws on counter curses. Draco, surprisingly, had become an effective instructor for the younger Slytherins Harry had started including. They were coming along nicely, his first generation of followers. The Chamber of Secrets has been opened. Enemies of the air, beware. The blood-red message gleamed on the corridor wall as students gathered in shocked silence. At the forefront, Harry stood with Hermione and Draco, his expression carefully neutral while internally his mind raced. The chamber was real, Voldemort's memories confirmed it. But someone else had opened it, which meant another Parselmouth was at Hogwarts, or someone had found an alternative method of entry. Either possibility was intriguing. Out of the way. Filch pushed through the crowd, then froze at the sight of his cat hanging stiffly from a torch bracket. My cat. My cat. Who's done this? His wild eyes landed on Harry. You. Potter. You've murdered my cat. Before anyone could react, Harry stepped forward, his voice calm but carrying. Mrs. Norris isn't dead, Mr. Filch. She's petrified. The crowd fell silent. Even the teachers who had just arrived looked surprised at Harry's confident assessment. How would you know that, Mr. Potter? Professor McGonagall asked sharply. Harry pointed to the cat's rigid posture and unblinking eyes. The body position is consistent with magical petrifaction, not rigor mortis. And there's no blood or visible trauma. Dumbledore stepped forward, examining the cat closely before confirming, Mr. Potter is correct. She has been petrified. The headmaster's eyes fixed on Harry with renewed interest. Most observant, Harry. Harry met his gaze innocently. I read ahead in Magical Ailments and Afflictions, Professor. There was a chapter on petrifaction. Later that night in the Slytherin common room, theories flew about the heir of Slytherin. Many eyes turned to Draco, whose family's dark affiliation was well known. It's not me, Draco said irritably when asked directly. If I were the heir, I'd have better targets than a mangy cat. What about you, Potter? Called an older student. Found yourself a new title to go with Boy Who Lived. Harry, who'd been quietly reading by the fire, looked up with an amused expression. If I were Slytherin's heir, I wouldn't announce it with theatrical wall graffiti. He returned to his book, adding casually, and Filch would be the target, not his cat. The common room fell silent as students processed the implication that Harry would go directly for killing rather than warning, a statement that somehow seemed perfectly believable coming from the enigmatic second year. Only Theo not noticed Harry's slight smile as he turned a page, as if the whole chamber situation were somehow entertaining to him. Harry waited until well past midnight before making his move. With Naby the Snake scouting ahead and a carefully crafted disillusionment charm concealing him, he made his way to the second-floor girls' bathroom. No humans or cats nearby, Naby reported, slithering back to Harry. Good work, Harry hissed quietly, then approached the sink with the tiny snake engraving. Open, he commanded in Parseltongue. The sink moved aside, revealing the entrance to Salazar Slytherin's legendary chamber. Harry cast a cushioning charm down the pipe before sliding into the darkness. Unlike Voldemort, who had only visited the chamber a few times during his Hogwarts years, Harry intended to fully exploit this hidden resource. The musty tunnel eventually opened into the vast main chamber, where the enormous statue of Salazar Slytherin loomed. Harry approached it confidently. Speak to me, Slytherin, greatest of the Hogwarts Four, he hissed, using the command he knew from Voldemort's memories. The statue's mouth began to open. Harry quickly closed his eyes and called out another Parseltongue command, "Sleep and remain hidden, great serpent. I am not here to release you." He heard the massive basilisk stir inside its chamber, then settle back with a disappointed hiss. "A speaker comes but does not free me? How cruel. I will free you for hunting soon," Harry promised, "but tonight I seek knowledge, not death." With the basilisk pacified, Harry began exploring the chamber thoroughly. Beyond the main room, he discovered what Voldemort had missed, a hidden study containing Slytherin's personal library and research notes. "Magnificent," Harry whispered, running his fingers over ancient tomes written in Parseltongue script that no one but he could read. For hours, he examined the collection, carefully cataloguing works on forgotten branches of magic, rituals that had been banned for centuries, and Slytherin's personal journals detailing his falling out with the other founders. Most valuable was a small black book outlining the chamber's true purpose, not merely housing a monster to purge Muggleborns, but serving as a magical nexus where the very foundations of Hogwarts wards could be accessed and modified. Slytherin had built a backdoor into the castle's defenses. As dawn approached, Harry reluctantly prepared to leave, shrinking several key texts and placing them in his enchanted pouch. He would return frequently in the coming weeks. "I will bring you food soon," he promised the basilisk before departing. "And perhaps targets for your gaze. But only those I select." The enormous serpent stirred eagerly at the promise. "The new master is wise. I serve. Harry, we need to talk." Hermione cornered him in the library, her face drawn with worry. In the weeks since the chamber's opening, 2 students had been petrified, a Hufflepuff Muggleborn and Colin Creevey, who had been annoyingly persistent about photographing Harry. Harry glanced up from the ancient arithmancy text he'd been translating. About whatever you're really doing." She sat down, casting a privacy charm, one he'd taught her, he noted with approval. "I'm researching Babylonian magical number sequences," he replied blandly, gesturing at his parchment. "Don't." Her voice hardened. "Don't treat me like I'm stupid, Harry. You disappear for hours. You come back with books in languages nobody can read. And somehow, the people who get petrified are all people who've bothered you in some way." Harry raised an eyebrow. "Are you accusing me of being the heir of Slytherin, Hermione?" "I'm saying I know you're involved somehow." Her brown eyes held his unflinchingly. "And I want in." That caught him by surprise. "In? Whatever you're doing, whatever you've found, it's beyond anything in the regular curriculum. You're learning things even the 7th years don't know." She leaned forward intently. "I want to learn too." Harry studied her carefully. He'd been gradually introducing her to more advanced magic, testing her boundaries and moral flexibility. But this was an unexpected acceleration of his timeline. "Why?" he asked simply. "Because there's something coming. Something bigger than house points or exams or even the chamber. I see it in the way you're preparing, gathering people, teaching us things we'd never learn in class." She took a deep breath. "And I want to be ready." Harry felt a surge of something almost like pride. Hermione was far more perceptive than he'd given her credit for. "It would require an oath," he said quietly. "What I'm doing, what I've found, it can't become common knowledge." "Magical oath?" she asked, looking nervous but determined. "Yes. What exactly would I be swearing to?" Harry smiled. "Nothing that would compromise your principles, yet. Just secrecy about what I show you, and a commitment to learning without ministry-imposed limitations." Hermione bit her lip. "And the petrifications?" "A regrettable side effect," Harry said smoothly. "Necessary casualties to maintain the illusion that someone else is operating the chamber." He watched her process this, the first direct confirmation he'd given her of his involvement in something technically criminal. The moral struggle played across her expressive face. "No one's died," she finally said, as if convincing herself. "And no one will, unless they pose a genuine threat." Harry reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm not Voldemort, Hermione. Everything I do has purpose beyond simple cruelty or blood purity nonsense. The physical contact, rare from Harry, seemed to decide her. When do we start? Tonight. Midnight. Come to the second-floor girls' bathroom. As she left, Harry reflected on the risk he was taking. Bringing Hermione into his inner sanctum was dangerous, she still had moral boundaries he'd need to carefully erode. But her magical potential and intelligence were too valuable to waste. And if she ultimately proved unable to embrace his vision fully, well, there were ways to modify memories. Hermione's scream echoed off the chamber walls as the massive basilisk slithered past the pillar where she stood, eyes tightly shut as Harry had instructed. It's okay, Harry called calmly in English before switching to Parseltongue. She is not prey. She is an ally. The basilisk hissed in acknowledgement and continued its patrol of the outer chamber. You can control it, Hermione gasped, still not opening her eyes. Yes. Open your eyes, Hermione. It's safe. I've instructed it to keep its killing gaze averted. Cautiously, she opened one eye, then both, gasping again as she saw the enormous serpent circling the chamber. This is impossible, she whispered. Basilisks can't be tamed. Not tamed. Commanded. Harry walked to her side. I'm a Parselmouth. Like Salazar Slytherin himself. But how? It's an incredibly rare ability, usually associated with, she stopped, the implications hitting her. Dark wizards? Harry finished with a small smile. Perhaps the distinction between dark and light isn't as clear-cut as our textbooks suggest. For the next 2 hours, Harry showed Hermione the outer chambers, explaining how the basilisk moved through the pipes, how he controlled who was targeted, and why, establishing the threat of the chamber while actually using it primarily as a research space. Finally, he led her to Slytherin's study. He'd removed the most dangerous texts but left enough to impress her with the historical significance. This is... Hermione ran her fingers over a 1,000-year-old desk reverently. This is beyond anything in Hogwarts, a history. We're literally standing where Salazar Slytherin conducted his private research. Knowledge suppressed for a millennium, Harry agreed. Available now to us alone. Why me? She asked suddenly. Why show me all this? Wouldn't Malfoy or the other Slytherins be more natural allies for the heir of Slytherin? Harry sat on the edge of the ancient desk. I'm not the heir in the way the legend suggests. I have no Slytherin bloodline. I can speak Parseltongue because... He paused, deciding how much truth to reveal. Because when Voldemort attacked me as a baby, some of his abilities transferred to me. This wasn't the full truth, but it was close enough without revealing the complete merging of consciousness. As for why you, he continued, because magical talent isn't determined by blood purity. You're the most gifted witch in our year, possibly in the school. And you question things. You don't accept limits just because someone in authority says they exist. Hermione flushed slightly at the praise. But you've been causing the petrifications. Controlled petrifications, Harry corrected. No permanent harm. Meanwhile, the resulting fear keeps Dumbledore distracted from my real activities while I access knowledge that would otherwise be denied to us. And what are those real activities? She pressed. Harry's eyes gleamed in the dim light of the chamber. Preparing. Learning. Building a foundation of power and influence that extends beyond school walls. He leaned forward. The wizarding world is stagnant, Hermione. Bound by traditions that make no logical sense. Someone needs to change it. And that someone is you. There was skepticism in her voice, but also fascination. That someone is us, Harry replied. Those with both the vision to see what could be and the power to make it reality. He could see her weighing his words, her brilliant mind processing implications and possibilities. I need to think, she finally said. Of course. But remember your oath. She nodded solemnly, then asked, "How do we get back up?" Harry smiled and held out his hand. "Like this." When she took it, he channeled his magic through them both and simply rose into the air, floating them up the pipe in defiance of gravity, a display of wandless, wordless magic that no second year should be capable of. Hermione's eyes widened in shock, then something else, hunger. Hunger for knowledge, for power, for understanding. Harry knew then that she would return to the chamber. And each time she did, another piece of her rigid moral framework would bend to accommodate the dark wonders he would show her. "Harry, my boy, please take a seat." Dumbledore's office looked the same as it had during their last private meeting, but the headmaster's expression was markedly more serious. Harry sat calmly, adopting his respectful student demeanor. "Is something wrong, Professor?" "I hope not." Dumbledore studied him over steepled fingers. "I wanted to discuss the recent incidents at the school. The Chamber of Secret situation. Has there been another attack?" Harry asked with perfectly calibrated concern. "No, thankfully. But I find myself curious about your perspectives on the matter." Dumbledore smiled gently. "You seem remarkably composed. Despite the climate of fear among many students." Harry returned the smile. "I suppose I've faced scarier things than a school legend, sir. And since the petrifications have been non-lethal so far." "Indeed. Most fortunate." Dumbledore's blue eyes seemed to intensify. "Your study group has grown quite popular, I understand. Students from all houses working together, most commendable." "Thank you, sir. Professor Flitwick speaks very highly of your teaching methods. Quite advanced for a second year." Harry maintained his modest expression. "I just try to explain things clearly, Professor." "And your own studies?" "Professor McGonagall tells me you've been requesting increasingly advanced transfiguration texts." "I find the subject fascinating," Harry replied truthfully. Dumbledore nodded slowly. "Harry, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I hope you'll answer with equal directness. Have you been experiencing any unusual sensations? Dreams, perhaps, or moments where you feel not quite yourself?" "Ah, so that was it." Dumbledore suspected the Voldemort connection was manifesting somehow. "Nothing unusual, sir," Harry lied smoothly. "My scar hurts occasionally, but Madame Pomfrey says that's normal for cursed scars." "I see." Dumbledore seemed to reach a decision. "Harry, if you ever find yourself drawn to the second-floor corridor, or if you hear voices that others cannot hear, I want you to come to me immediately." "Day or night?" Harry widened his eyes slightly, as if confused. "Voices, sir." "Just an old man's caution," Dumbledore said with a forced smile. "These are strange times at Hogwarts." As Harry left the office, he reflected that Dumbledore was growing more suspicious but still hadn't grasped the full situation. The headmaster was looking for signs of possession or influence, not understanding that the merger of Voldemort's essence with Harry's had been total and completed years ago. It wasn't Voldemort influencing Harry anymore. It was something new, something potentially far more dangerous because it combined Voldemort's knowledge with Harry's innate power and innovative thinking, all without the psychological damage that had made Riddle so unstable. Harry would need to accelerate certain plans. Dumbledore wouldn't remain in the dark forever. "The Daily Prophet is calling him the most dangerous wizard in Britain," Blaise said, tossing the newspaper onto the table in their private study room. "Black." Harry picked up the paper, examining the haunted face of Sirius Black screaming from the front page. "Interesting timing. First person ever to escape Azkaban," Theo noted. "Must have serious power or knowledge the Ministry doesn't understand." Harry said nothing, but his mind was working rapidly. Sirius Black, his godfather, according to Voldemort's memories of intelligence reports. Supposedly betrayed the Potters, but the story had never made complete sense. "They're increasing security at Hogwarts," Draco added. "Father says they're bringing in Dementors." Harry's eyes narrowed slightly. Dementors at a school. How desperate. Later that night, alone in the chamber, Harry pulled out a special parchment he'd been developing, a modified version of the Marauder's map that Voldemort had once confiscated from James Potter and studied before dismissing it as a mere prank item. Unlike the original, Harry's version covered the entire Hogwarts grounds and could be keyed to search for specific magical signatures. If Sirius Black came anywhere near the castle, Harry would know immediately. But why would a supposed Death Eater who'd spent 12 years in Azkaban come to Hogwarts? The obvious answer was Harry himself, either to finish what Voldemort started or... An alternative theory formed in Harry's mind. One that would require testing. In the meantime, the Black situation provided a useful distraction from the chamber incidents, which Harry had strategically reduced to maintain the illusion that the heir was being cautious due to increased security. By the time exams approached in spring, the chamber hysteria had largely subsided, though Dumbledore remained vigilant. Harry had used the intervening months to fully explore Slytherin's library, copy the most valuable texts, and implement certain modifications to Hogwarts' ward structure through the access points in the chamber. Changes so subtle no one would notice until he activated them. Changes that would eventually give him unprecedented control over the castle itself. The trap was set. Harry had carefully arranged a trail of magical breadcrumbs leading to the Shrieking Shack, breadcrumbs only someone specifically looking for him would notice. Then he waited, seemingly alone and vulnerable. He didn't wait long. "Hello, godson." The gaunt man who emerged from the shadows barely resembled the handsome wizard from the memories Harry had extracted from the Voldemort fragment. 12 years in Azkaban had hollowed Sirius Black physically, but his eyes remained sharp and assessing. Harry didn't draw his wand. "You're not here to kill me." It wasn't a question. Black's eyebrows rose. "How can you be so sure?" "Because you're not a Death Eater. You never were." Harry tilted his head. "You weren't my parents' secret keeper, were you?" The shock on Black's face was genuine. "How could you possibly know that?" "I have my sources." Harry gestured to a chair he'd conjured earlier. "Sit. You look terrible." Black barked a laugh, a rough, rusty sound. "Not big on niceties, are you?" "James was always." "I'm not James," Harry cut him off. "And this isn't a social call. You escaped Azkaban for a reason. I assume it involves Peter Pettigrew." Black went rigid. "What do you know about Peter?" "I know he's alive. I know he's hiding as a rat, specifically, the Weasley family pet." Harry smiled coldly. "I know he's the one who betrayed my parents to Voldemort." "How?" Black whispered. "How could you possibly know all this? You were a baby when, let's just say I have access to information most don't." Harry leaned forward. "The question is, what are we going to do about it?" For the next hour, Harry outlined his plan to capture Pettigrew and clear Black's name, with certain conditions attached. Black listened with increasing confusion and concern as his godson, not yet 13, detailed a complex legal and political strategy that sounded more like it came from a veteran Wisengamot member than a child. "Harry," Black finally interrupted, "how do you know all this? Who's been teaching you?" Harry's green eyes, so like Lily's yet somehow colder, locked onto Black's. "No one's been teaching me, Sirius. I'm self-taught." "That's not possible. The things you're talking about, political maneuvering, ancient family alliances, magical theory, these aren't things a child just picks up." "I'm not a typical child." Harry stood, pacing the room with an eerie gracefulness. "I have abilities most wizards don't. I see patterns, connections. I understand magic on an instinctive level." Black frowned, something about Harry's movements triggering an old memory. "You remind me of someone." Harry stopped pacing. "Who?" "I can't quite." Black shook his head. "It doesn't matter. What matters is getting you somewhere safe. Once my name is cleared, I don't need protection," Harry said flatly. What I need is a politically rehabilitated godfather with access to the Black family resources and Wisengamot seat. The bluntness of this statement seemed to shock Black. You sound like a Slytherin. Harry smiled. I am one, after all. James and Lily's son in Slytherin. Black ran a hand through his matted hair. That must have set tongues wagging. You'd be surprised how quickly people accept the unexpected when it's presented with sufficient confidence. Harry returned to his chair. Now, about Pettigrew. I've already taken steps to ensure he can't escape easily. We'll need to move quickly once term ends. As they finalized plans, Black studied his godson with growing unease. This was not the boy he'd expected to find, the child of his best friend and Lily Evans. This boy was calculating, confident beyond his years, with an edge of something Black couldn't quite name but recognized from his own family, the darker members of House Black. Yet Harry was offering him freedom, revenge against Pettigrew, and a chance to fulfill his role as godfather. Whatever else was happening with the boy, Black couldn't walk away from that. Just one more thing, Harry, Black said as their meeting concluded. What exactly do you want the Black resources and influence for? Harry's smile was disarming, almost innocent. Why, to make the wizarding world better, of course. Isn't that what everyone wants? Something in his tone made Sirius Black shiver despite himself. End-of-year exams passed in a blur of perfect scores for Harry and near-perfect ones for his inner circle, who had benefited from his specialized tutoring. Even Neville, once the most insecure student in their year, had improved dramatically under Harry's guidance. On the last day of term, Hermione found Harry by the lake, away from the other students celebrating the start of summer. I made a decision, she said without preamble. About your offer. After their chamber expeditions had increased in frequency, Harry had offered Hermione a formal position in what he carefully referred to as his research group, rather than what it truly was, the beginnings of a power structure with him at its center. And? Harry watched her closely. I'm in. Fully in. She sat beside him, looking out over the water. But I have conditions. Harry raised an eyebrow, amused. You're negotiating with me? Yes. She met his gaze firmly. First, no killing. I can accept that changing the wizarding world requires questionable methods sometimes. But I won't be part of unnecessary death. Define unnecessary, Harry countered. Self-defense is one thing. Eliminating political opponents simply because they're in the way is another. Harry considered this. Agreed, with the caveat that some threats can only be permanently neutralized. But I'll consult with you in those cases. Hermione nodded. Second, whatever we build has to be better than what exists now. Not just different, not just with us in charge instead of the current power structure. Actually better, for magical creatures, for Muggleborns, for everyone. That's always been the plan, Harry assured her. I have no interest in blood purity nonsense. I want a meritocracy where power and ability determine status, not birth. And third, Hermione took a deep breath, you have to be honest with me. About everything. No more half-truths or convenient omissions. This was the difficult one. Harry couldn't reveal everything about his merged consciousness, not yet. But Hermione was too valuable to lose over partial honesty. I'll tell you as much as I safely can, he offered instead. Some knowledge is dangerous, Hermione. Not just to others, but to the knower. She studied him intently. What happened to you, Harry? Something changed you. Made you different from other kids our age. Harry was silent for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, he said, when Voldemort tried to kill me, something went wrong with the curse. It created a connection between us. On my 3rd birthday, that connection expanded. I gained access to some of his knowledge, his magical understanding. This was the closest to the truth he'd told anyone, a simplified version that omitted the complete soul merging but acknowledged the source of his abilities. You have Voldemort's knowledge? Hermione whispered, horrified yet fascinated. Some of it. The useful parts, without the madness and bigotry. Harry took her hand, an uncharacteristically tender gesture. I'm still me, Hermione. But with tools that let me see beyond what others can see. Do you understand what that means? She nodded slowly. It means you can change everything. Not just me. Us. Harry squeezed her hand. I need your brilliance, your perspective. Your humanity. The last word hung between them, an implicit acknowledgement that whatever had happened to Harry had distanced him from normal human experience in ways even he recognized. Okay, she finally said. I accept your modified terms. Harry smiled, genuine warmth reaching his eyes for once. Good. Because this summer is when everything really begins. The captured Peter Pettigrew squirmed in his magical restraints as Harry and Sirius faced him in the abandoned farmhouse Harry had designated for the confrontation. Please, the rat-like man whimpered. Harry, your father wouldn't want this, James would show mercy, don't speak his name, Sirius snarled, one trained on his former friend. Harry observed Pettigrew dispassionately. The man's magical aura was weak, his character weaker. Voldemort had considered him a useful tool but ultimately disposable. Harry saw no reason to disagree with that assessment. Here's what's going to happen, Peter, Harry said calmly. You're going to confess to betraying my parents and framing Sirius. The confession will be given under Veritaserum to a select audience I've arranged. I can't, Pettigrew sobbed. He'll kill me. Voldemort? Harry laughed softly. He's a wraith, barely clinging to existence. His remaining followers are scattered and leaderless. You don't understand. There are others, darker things, Harry flicked his wand, silencing Pettigrew. Save it for the confession. He turned to Sirius. Are you clear on the plan? You'll be exonerated, but we need to position this carefully for maximum political advantage. Sirius nodded, though his expression remained troubled. In the weeks since their first meeting, he'd grown increasingly concerned about Harry's nature, but his desire for freedom and justice overrode those concerns. Amelia Bones will be fair, he confirmed. And with Fudge politically invested in capturing the real criminal, he'll have no choice but to publicly acknowledge my innocence. Precisely. And in the ensuing confusion about how the Ministry could have imprisoned the wrong man for 12 years. Harry smiled coldly, we'll have leverage to push for other changes. The next day, in a private Ministry hearing room, Harry watched from beneath his invisibility cloak as the plan unfolded perfectly. Pettigrew confessed under Veritaserum, Sirius was provisionally cleared pending full Wisengamot review, and Minister Fudge floundered to explain how such a miscarriage of justice had occurred. More importantly, Amelia Bones, Susan's aunt, whom Harry had carefully cultivated through his Hufflepuff connections, was now questioning the entire handling of post-war trials. Just as he'd anticipated. By the time Harry returned to Privet Drive, the wizarding newspapers were in an uproar. The political landscape was shifting exactly as he'd planned, creating openings his allies could exploit in the coming months. Meanwhile, he had summer research to complete and a third-year strategy to finalize. The chamber had yielded most of its secrets, but there were other hidden places in Hogwarts that Voldemort had never fully explored. The Room of Requirement, for instance, with its vast repository of lost objects. And beyond Hogwarts, there were certain international connections to establish. The magical communities of Eastern Europe had knowledge that Britain had suppressed for centuries. Harry Potter, the strange hybrid of innocent child and Dark Lord, smiled as he plotted his next moves. The wizarding world thought the Chamber of Secrets crisis had passed. They believed the biggest news was Sirius Black's innocence. None of them understood that these were merely opening gambits in a much longer game. Potter. Harry looked up from his breakfast on September 1st to find Draco Malfoy standing awkwardly at the entrance to his private compartment on the Hogwarts Express. "Malfoy. How was your summer?" Harry gestured for him to sit. Draco sat stiffly, his normally confident demeanor subdued. "Interesting. Father had many visitors after the Black exoneration. Important people, asking questions about you. I expected as much." Harry had anticipated that Lucius would become a conduit for pureblood inquiries about the Potter boy who'd orchestrated such a political coup. "He wants to know what your goals are." Draco looked uncomfortable delivering what was clearly a prepared question. Harry studied the blonde boy thoughtfully. Draco had been evolving over the past year, still arrogant and prejudiced, but increasingly aware that his family's traditional allegiances might not serve their interests in the changing landscape Harry was creating. "My goals are straightforward, Draco. I intend to restructure magical Britain's power dynamics to reward ability rather than ancestry or wealth alone." Draco frowned. "That sounds revolutionary." "Evolution, not revolution," Harry corrected. "Gradual, inevitable change that benefits those smart enough to position themselves accordingly." He leaned forward slightly. "The question is, where will House Malfoy stand? Clinging to outdated blood prejudice that limits your potential allies? Or adapting to recognize that power comes in many forms?" The implied challenge hung in the air between them. Draco had been raised to believe in pureblood supremacy, but he was also pragmatic enough to recognize shifting power. "What exactly are you offering?" Draco finally asked. Harry smiled. "A chance to be on the winning side this time. To help shape the new order rather than being subjected to it. And my father? Lucius is a survivor. He'll adjust when he sees which way the wind is blowing." Harry's voice hardened slightly. "But I'm offering you a chance to step out of his shadow, Draco. To be defined by your own choices, not his failures." The compartment door slid open before Draco could respond, revealing Hermione, Theo, Blaise, and several others from Harry's inner circle. They paused, sensing the tension. "Perfect timing," Harry said smoothly. "We were just discussing the future. Weren't we, Draco?" The blonde boy looked at the diverse group, purebloods, half-bloods, and Hermione the Muggleborn, all united by their connection to Harry. Something shifted in his expression as he calculated the potential advantages of this alliance versus his father's fading network. "Yes," Draco finally said, straightening his shoulders. "And I believe House Malfoy's interests lie with progress, not stagnation." Harry's smile widened. "Welcome aboard." The first public demonstration of Harry's true capabilities came unexpectedly in October, during a Hogsmeade weekend that third years were permitted to attend for the first time. Harry was walking with Hermione and Neville through the village when the temperature suddenly plummeted. Frost crystallized on windows, and residents began hurrying indoors with fearful glances skyward. "Dementors," Hermione whispered, reaching for her wand. But why would they leave their positions around Hogwarts? Harry sensed it immediately. Something had drawn the soul-sucking creatures to the village. Something they hungered for. He scanned the area quickly and spotted a dark-haired witch watching from the shadows near the Hog's Head, her expression one of malicious anticipation. As at least 20 Dementors converged on the village center, panic erupted. Students screamed and ran for shelter while the few adults present tried ineffectually to cast Patronus charms. Most produced only feeble wisps of silver that dissipated instantly. Harry assessed the situation in seconds. The mysterious witch was controlling the Dementors somehow, a skill that should have been impossible according to Ministry dogma. More importantly, this was clearly a test, of him specifically, given the creature's focus on his location. A test or a message. Either way, he couldn't ignore it. "Get inside," he ordered Hermione and Neville, pushing them toward the 3 broomsticks. "Harry, no." Hermione grabbed his arm. "Even adult wizards can't fight this many Dementors." Harry met her gaze. "Trust me." Something in his eyes must have convinced her, because she reluctantly retreated, pulling a terrified Neville with her. As the Dementors closed in, Harry walked calmly to the center of the village square. Students and villagers watched in horror from windows and doorways as the black-cloaked creatures surrounded the seemingly suicidal third year. Harry raised his wand and closed his eyes briefly, focusing not on a traditional happy memory but on something else entirely, the pure, clean feeling of power flowing through him. The satisfaction of watching his plans unfold. The absolute certainty of his eventual triumph. Expecto Patronum, he called, but the spell he cast was no ordinary Patronus charm. It was a modified version he developed based on Slytherin's research, one that didn't merely repel Dementors but dominated them. From his wand erupted not an animal form but a storm of silver-white energy that expanded outward in pulsing waves. Where it touched the Dementors, they froze in place, unable to advance or retreat. The light reshaped itself into chains that bound the creatures, forcing them to the ground in subservience. The display of magic was far beyond an EWT level, beyond what most adult wizards could achieve. Every witness stood transfixed as Harry Potter, age 13, single-handedly subdued 20 Dementors with a spell variant no one had ever seen before. Once all the Dementors were secured, Harry turned toward the spot where the dark-haired witch had been standing, only to find she had vanished. A warning, then, not just a test. From the doorway of the Three Broomsticks, Hermione watched with a mixture of awe and fear. This was the first time Harry had revealed even a fraction of his true abilities publicly. Whatever plans he had been developing in secret, they were clearly accelerating. Inside the Hog's Head, Albus Dumbledore observed the scene with grave concern. He had arrived too late to intervene but just in time to witness Harry's extraordinary display of power. The spell was unlike anything in the standard magical curriculum, more troubling still was the boy's expression as he cast it. Not fear or strain, but satisfaction. Almost pleasure. The pieces are moving, Dumbledore murmured to himself. Faster than I anticipated. News of the Hogsmeade incident, as it came to be called, spread through the wizarding world like wildfire. The Daily Prophet's front page showed a photograph of Harry standing amid subdued Dementors, his expression eerily calm. Boy who lived displays unprecedented power. Ministry experts baffled by modified Patronus, you've changed everything, Hermione said quietly as they sat in their private study room, away from the whispers and stares that now followed Harry everywhere. People are afraid of you now. And curious. Good. Harry was reviewing correspondence that had flooded in since the incident, letters from ministry officials, international magical researchers, and more worryingly, notes from dark magic practitioners who recognized the underlying principles of his modified spell. Was this part of your plan? She pressed. Harry glanced up. Not exactly as it happened, but the outcome serves our purposes. The wizarding public needed to see concrete proof of my capabilities. For what purpose? Positioning. Harry handed her several letters. Read these. The International Confederation of Wizards is requesting a demonstration. 2 magical research institutes have offered apprenticeships to a 13-year-old. And 3 Wisengamot members have hinted at political support for progressive magical education reforms. Hermione scanned the letters with widening eyes. They're treating you like an adult wizard. A powerful one. Power demands respect, regardless of age. Harry leaned back in his chair. More importantly, this incident has forced Dumbledore's hand. He can no longer pretend I'm just an unusually talented student. As if on cue, a school owl arrived with a note requesting Harry's presence in the headmaster's office immediately. Right on schedule, Harry murmured, pocketing the note. Hermione, while I'm gone, brief the others. Phase 2 begins tonight. Dumbledore wasn't alone when Harry arrived at his office. Professor McGonagall and, surprisingly, a grim-faced Sirius Black were also present. Sirius, Harry greeted his godfather with genuine warmth. Despite their complicated relationship, he had developed a certain affection for the man. I didn't know you were visiting today. This isn't a social call, Harry, Sirius replied tensely. Dumbledore gestured to a chair. Please sit, Harry. We have much to discuss following yesterday's events. Harry sat calmly, noting the subtle magical monitoring charms Dumbledore had placed around the office since their last meeting. Interesting that the headmaster felt the need for such precautions. I assume you want to know how I performed the modified Patronus, Harry offered. Among other things, Dumbledore agreed. That spell was not standard magic, Harry. Even I would find it challenging to control that many Dementors simultaneously. Harry shrugged slightly. I found references to variant forms in some old defense texts and experimented with the formula. The emotional component is different, it requires focused intent rather than just happy memories. This was partly true. The spell was indeed based on modified intent, though the texts had come from Slytherin's private library, not any resources available to students. Mr. Potter, Professor McGonagall interjected, no third-year student should be capable of creating spell variants, regardless of the reference materials. The magical theory alone is beyond any WT level. I understand magical theory intuitively, Harry replied simply. Always have. Harry, Sirius leaned forward, his expression concerned, this isn't just about the spell. It's about patterns of behavior that have been, concerning. Harry raised an eyebrow. What patterns? Dumbledore's blue eyes had lost their customary twinkle. Your remarkable academic achievements. Your influence over students from all houses. Reports from professors about magical capabilities far beyond your years. And now this public display of power that most adult wizards couldn't match. Are you suggesting there's something wrong with excelling academically and magically? Harry asked coolly. Not at all, Dumbledore said. But combined with certain anomalies. In your magical signature, it raises questions about the source of your abilities. So they had detected something. Harry had suspected Dumbledore might have instruments capable of identifying the merged magical core he possessed. What exactly are you implying, Headmaster? Harry's voice remained calm, but a subtle pressure began to build in the room, his magic responding to potential threat. Sirius cut in quickly. Harry, we're concerned that when Voldemort attacked you as a baby, he may have transferred more than just a scar. That you might be unconsciously drawing on magical abilities or knowledge that aren't entirely your own. Clever approach, Harry thought. Frame it as concern rather than accusation. An interesting theory, he acknowledged. But if that were true, wouldn't I be showing signs of dark inclinations? Cruelty. Prejudice. My friendships and academic interests span all houses and blood statuses. The concern, Dumbledore said carefully, is that influence can be subtle. That you might not even be aware of how your natural development has been affected. Harry allowed a flicker of controlled anger to show. So because I'm powerful, because I excel beyond your expectations, you assume something must be wrong with me? No one is saying that, McGonagall protested. Aren't you? Harry stood suddenly, his magic making the instruments on Dumbledore's desk vibrate slightly. I survived a killing curse. I grew up being told I was a freak by my relatives for any accidental magic. And now that I've finally found a place where my abilities are supposed to be celebrated, I'm being treated with suspicion for being too good at magic. The emotional appeal was calculated to resonate with Sirius, who had also chafed under family expectations and restrictions. Harry, Sirius began, his resolve visibly weakening, we just want to help, by questioning my very identity. Harry shook his head, allowing his voice to crack slightly. I thought you of all people would understand what it's like to be judged and feared for abilities you were born with, Sirius. The manipulative empathy worked. Sirius's expression shifted from concern to guilt almost instantly. Dumbledore, however, wasn't so easily swayed. Harry, no one is judging you. But surely you must admit that your capabilities are extraordinary even by the standards of magical prodigies. Harry met the headmaster's gaze directly, allowing his mental shields to reveal just enough genuine emotion to seem authentic. Yes, I'm extraordinary, he said quietly. I've always known that. Maybe instead of treating that as suspicious, you should consider that I might be exactly what the wizarding world needs right now. The statement hung in the air, its ambiguity perfect for interpretation according to each listener's hopes and fears. After a tense moment, Dumbledore sighed. Very well, Harry. But I would ask that you consult with professors before attempting any more spell modifications, particularly in public settings. For safety reasons. Harry recognized the tactical retreat. Dumbledore was backing off temporarily while he gathered more information. Of course, Professor. Safety first. Harry's smile didn't reach his eyes. May I go now? I have homework to complete. As Harry left the office, the adults exchanged troubled glances. He's hiding something, McGonagall said quietly. That much is clear. Yes, Dumbledore agreed. But what concerns me more is what he chose to reveal. I might be exactly what the wizarding world needs right now. Those are not the words of a child, regardless of intelligence. Sirius ran a hand through his hair. What are you suggesting, Albus? The headmaster's expression was grave. That Harry Potter may be developing an agenda that extends far beyond school walls. And that we may already be too late to shape it. That night, in an expanded section of the Chamber of Secrets that Harry had converted into a proper meeting room, his inner circle gathered for the first time in full. 12 students representing all 4 houses, ranging from 2nd to 6th year, each chosen for specific talents, connections, or magical potential. Hermione, his closest lieutenant. Draco, his connection to the old pureblood families. Blaise and Theo, the strategist and scholar. Susan Bones, his link to law enforcement. Neville, whose confidence had grown alongside his increasingly impressive magical ability. Luna Lovegood, whose unique perception saw patterns others missed. And 5 others selected for complementary skills. Welcome, Harry said, standing before them at a round table inscribed with ancient runes of secrecy and loyalty, spells from Slytherin's private collection that ensured nothing discussed here could be magically extracted or betrayed. Today marks the formal beginning of what we've been building toward for the past 2 years. The Hogsmeade incident has accelerated our timeline, but also created unprecedented opportunities. The whole school's talking about you, Susan confirmed. My aunt sent me 3 letters asking questions about your spell work. And my father has instructed me to cultivate the alliance at any cost, Draco added with a wry smile. Harry nodded. The display was necessary to establish a public power baseline. The magical community needed to see that we, represent something beyond traditional limitations. What exactly are we calling ourselves? Luna asked dreamily. Every movement needs a name. We're not a movement yet, Harry corrected. For now, we're simply a research collective. The Concordium. Latin for agreement or harmony, Hermione explained for those who didn't recognize the term. Appropriate, Theo noted, since we represent all houses working in concert. Harry moved to a large enchanted map of Britain he'd mounted on the wall. Our immediate objectives remain educational excellence and strategic relationship building. But our long-term goals are more ambitious. He tapped the map with his wand, causing illuminated points to appear across the country. These are the power centers of magical Britain. The Ministry. Gringotts. St. Mungos. The major magical settlements and transportation hubs. Another tap changed the display to show lines of influence connecting these points to family names and political factions. For centuries, the same dozen families have controlled these institutions, regardless of which minister holds office or which policies are officially enacted. This monopoly on power has stagnated our society, restricted magical innovation, and left us vulnerable to repeated dark wizard insurgencies. The students watched, fascinated, as Harry outlined power dynamics most of them had only vaguely understood before. Our goal is to gradually replace this ossified system with a meritocratic alternative. Not through revolution or destruction, but through strategic positioning and controlled reform. And how exactly do 12 students accomplish that? Blaise asked, ever the pragmatist. Harry smiled. We're not just students. We're the next generation of department heads, Wisengamot members, researchers, and innovators. By the time we graduate, each of you will be positioned to step into roles of genuine influence. Roles we're already preparing for. He gestured to individual folders on the table. These contain your personalized development plans. Educational focuses, political connections to cultivate, summer apprenticeships I've arranged. Some of you have already begun this work without realizing its full context. As they opened the folders, expressions of surprise and in some cases awe spread across their faces. The plans were comprehensive, tailored to each individual's strengths and family backgrounds. This is incredibly detailed, Neville said, scanning pages of botanical research opportunities that aligned perfectly with his interests but pushed well beyond Hogwarts curriculum. Merlin's beard, Draco muttered, seeing the list of international contacts Harry had identified for him to cultivate, contacts that would give House Malfoy influence beyond Britain's borders, something his father had never achieved. These plans represent the next 3 years, Harry continued. By graduation, the groundwork will be laid for Phase 3, actual policy implementation and institutional reform. Hermione, who'd already been briefed on much of this, watched her classmates' reactions carefully. She saw the moment when understanding dawned on each face, that Harry wasn't just talking about student projects or career preparation, but a comprehensive plan to reshape magical Britain from the inside out. You've been planning this since first year, Susan realized. All the cross-house study groups, the special projects, the political connections through our families. Longer than that, Harry admitted. But yes, everything at Hogwarts has been building toward this moment. The question now is whether you're truly committed to what comes next. One by one, they pledged their commitment, some enthusiastically, others more cautiously. Only Theo hesitated. This goes beyond school politics or post-graduation careers, he said quietly. You're talking about fundamentally altering the wizarding world's power structure. That makes us targets. Yes, Harry acknowledged. Which is why tonight, I'm offering something in return for your commitment. He removed a vial of golden potion from his robes. Advanced magical knowledge unavailable anywhere in Britain. Starting with this. What is it? Hermione asked, eyeing the potion curiously. Mental acuity enhancement, Harry explained. Permanently increases cognitive processing speed and magical intuition by roughly 30%. My own creation, based on principles from Slytherin's private research. The room went silent. Such a potion, if real, would be worth fortunes, and probably highly regulated or outright banned by the Ministry. You've tested it? Blaise asked skeptically. On myself, 6 months ago. Harry met each of their gazes. I wouldn't offer anything to you that I haven't verified personally. The implications were clear. Harry was offering not just political opportunity but magical enhancement, abilities beyond what traditional education provided. One by one, they accepted, drinking the potion and experiencing the strange sensation as their minds sharpened, connections forming more rapidly between concepts and ideas. As the meeting concluded, Harry held Hermione back. Thoughts? He asked once they were alone. They're committed now, she observed. The potion sealed it, both because of its effects and because taking it was technically illegal. Harry nodded. Shared risk creates stronger bonds than mere ideological agreement. Hermione studied him thoughtfully. The witch in Hogsmeade, the one controlling the Dementors. You know who she was, don't you? I have suspicions, Harry admitted. Someone wants me to know I'm being watched. Someone with connections to powers Dumbledore thinks are long gone. Grindelwald? Or his legacy, Harry confirmed. The timing is too perfect to be coincidence, just as we begin to move publicly, a dark power stirs. Hermione frowned. Is that concern or anticipation I hear in your voice? Harry smiled enigmatically. Both. Every worthy protagonist needs a proper antagonist, don't you think? Otherwise, where's the challenge? Her expression grew troubled. This isn't a story, Harry. It's people's lives. Of course, he agreed, his tone softening. But narrative matters in politics and war. Perception shapes reality. He touched her shoulder lightly. Don't worry, Hermione. Everything is proceeding according to design, even the unexpected elements. As they left the chamber, Harry reflected on the meeting's success. His inner circle was now formally established and enhanced. Dumbledore was concerned but not yet actively opposing him, and the Mysterious Witch had announced herself as a player on the board. The game was becoming more interesting. And Harry Potter, the strange hybrid of innocent child and reborn Dark Lord, was playing to win. Chapter 3, The Vision. The train leaves in 20 minutes, Potter, Draco said, checking his expensive pocket watch. You sure about this? Harry watched the Hogwarts Express billowing steam on the platform, students rushing to board for the journey home after third year. His inner circle, the Concordium, stood in a loose semicircle around him, waiting for his final instructions before the summer separation. Completely sure, Harry replied. Dumbledore expects me back at Privet Drive to maintain the blood wards. His expectations are no longer my concern. The past year had transformed Harry's position at Hogwarts. After the Hogsmeade Dementor incident, whispers followed him everywhere, equal parts fear, admiration, and speculation. The Concordium had expanded to 20 members across all houses, each developing specialized skills according to Harry's personalized plans for them. More importantly, Harry had spent the year implementing subtle changes to Hogwarts' ancient ward structure through access points in the Chamber of Secrets, changes that would prove vital to his summer activities. Coordinates are in your packets, Harry continued, handing each member a sealed envelope. Hermione will contact you with activation times for the port keys. Maintain normal correspondence patterns with family and friends. Nothing in writing about our actual activities. Neville shifted nervously. My grandmother watches my mail during summer. Which is why yours contains additional precautions, Harry assured him. The parchment appears blank to anyone but you. As the final whistle blew, Harry nodded to his followers. Go. Enjoy the train ride. Act normal. We'll reconvene in 3 weeks. They boarded reluctantly, all except Hermione, who lingered behind. You're taking a huge risk, she said quietly. Defying Dumbledore so openly, it's time, Harry cut her off. We've built the foundation. Now we build the structure. Her brown eyes studied his face intently. Over the past year, she'd noticed subtle changes in his appearance, his features growing sharper, his eyes taking on an intensity that sometimes reminded her of someone else, someone older. The Ministry will track your magic if you leave the Dursleys, she warned. Harry's smile held secrets. No, they won't. He touched her shoulder lightly. 3 days at your parents' house, then activate your port key. Bring the materials we discussed. As the train pulled away, Hermione watching him from a window, Harry turned and walked in the opposite direction, away from where Dumbledore's Order members would be waiting to escort him, safely, to Privet Drive. Time to show the wizarding world exactly who Harry Potter had become. Sirius Black paced the elegant study of his recently reclaimed family home, Grimmauld Place. The ancestral Black mansion had been cleansed of its worst dark artifacts, though much work remained to make it truly habitable. He's missing, Remus, Sirius said, running a hand through his still too long hair. 3 days now. Disappeared right from the platform. Remus Lupin, looking haggard after the recent full moon, nodded grimly. Dumbledore's people are searching, but Harry's clearly planned this carefully. No magical signature to trace, no sightings in wizarding areas. He's 14. How does a 14-year-old disappear so completely? Sirius slammed a fist against the mantelpiece, disturbing a portrait that muttered darkly before falling silent again. You know he's not a typical 14-year-old, Remus replied quietly. After what I saw teaching him last year. The sentence hung unfinished. Remus had spent the year as defense against the dark arts professor, giving him unprecedented access to Harry's developing abilities. What he'd witnessed had both impressed and disturbed him. I should have pushed harder to have him live with me, Sirius muttered. The Ministry finally cleared me completely, but Dumbledore insisted the blood wards were essential. And now those wards are failing, Remus confirmed. Dumbledore checked this morning. Whatever protection Lily's sacrifice created is weakening without Harry's presence. A sharp crack interrupted them as a house elf apparated into the room, clutching a letter. Master Sirius, croaked Creature, the ancient family servant who developed an unexpected respect for Sirius after his full exoneration. This just arrived by Eagle Owl. Powerful magic on it. Addressed to you personally. Sirius snatched the letter, recognizing Harry's neat handwriting immediately. Breaking the seal released a small pulse of magic that briefly illuminated the parchment. It's from Harry, he confirmed, scanning the contents quickly before his expression shifted to confusion. He wants me to meet him. Alone. Where? Remus asked, leaning forward. Potter family vault. Gringotts. Sirius checked his watch. In 1 hour. It could be a trap, Remus cautioned. Death Eaters trying to lure you out. Sirius shook his head. No, it's genuine. The seal contained a fragment of Harry's magical signature, something only he could produce. He was already summoning his cloak. I have to go. Dumbledore would advise against it. Dumbledore isn't his godfather, Sirius snapped. I am. And maybe if I'd acted like it sooner instead of deferring to Albus, Harry wouldn't have felt the need to run. Remus sighed, knowing that particular argument was impossible to counter. Just, be careful. Something's happening with Harry that none of us fully understand. Sirius paused at the door, his expression darkening. That's what worries me most, Moony. I'm starting to think the person who understands exactly what's happening is Harry himself. The Potter family vault looked nothing like Harry remembered from his single visit before first year. Gone was the simple pile of gold and family heirlooms. In its place stood an expanded chamber with organized shelves of artifacts, books, and magical devices. You've been busy, Sirius observed, taking in the transformed space. How did you even access this without a Gringotts escort? Harry smiled, seated comfortably behind an ancient desk that clearly predated his parents' era. The goblins and I have come to an arrangement. They appreciate direct negotiation without ministry interference. Sirius took in his godson's appearance with growing concern. Harry looked older somehow, not physically, but in his bearing and eyes. He wore formal wizarding robes of a cut that hadn't been fashionable for decades, yet somehow suited him perfectly. Everyone's looking for you, Sirius said, deciding direct confrontation was best. Dumbledore, the Ministry, me. You can't just disappear, Harry. I haven't disappeared, Harry replied calmly. I've simply relocated to property that rightfully belongs to me. The Dursleys are not my family in any meaningful sense, Harry cut him off. And the blood protection is no longer necessary. I've implemented superior alternatives. The casual confidence with which he dismissed Dumbledore's carefully constructed protection stunned Sirius. Harry, whatever you think you've done, you're still underage. The Ministry cannot detect my magic, Harry finished for him. I've ensured that. Sirius stared. That's not possible. The trace is a crude monitoring charm applied to wands sold to minors, not an inherent tracking of magical individuals. Harry steepled his fingers. I no longer exclusively use minister-registered wands. The implications of this statement, that Harry had obtained illegal untraceable wands and somehow neutralized the trace, left Sirius momentarily speechless. I didn't ask you here to debate my independence, Harry continued. I asked you here because you have a choice to make, Sirius. A choice? Harry nodded, his green eyes intensely focused. Whether to continue acting as Dumbledore's agent in matters concerning me, or to fulfill your role as my godfather on my terms. The bluntness of the statement caught Sirius off guard. It's not that simple, Harry. Dumbledore is trying to protect you. From what? Harry asked sharply. Voldemort is weakened but regaining strength. His former Death Eaters are scattered but not eliminated. And there are other players emerging. He leaned forward. Meanwhile, I've spent 3 years developing magical abilities and political connections that could actually address these threats, only to be treated as a child who needs supervision. Sirius shifted uncomfortably, recognizing the truth in Harry's assessment. Dumbledore's protective approach had indeed failed to acknowledge Harry's extraordinary capabilities. What exactly are you proposing? He asked carefully. Harry's expression softened slightly. That you recognize me as the head of House Potter, despite my technical age. That you support my decisions regarding my education, residence, and political activities. And that you serve as my proxy in the Wisengamot when needed, voting according to my instructions rather than Dumbledore's suggestions. You're asking me to help you become fully independent at 14. I'm asking you to acknowledge the reality that already exists, Harry corrected. I am independent. The question is whether you'll work with me or against me. The statement hung in the air between them, both challenge and plea. Sirius studied his godson, trying to reconcile the child he'd expected to mentor with the self-possessed young man before him. What happens if I say no? He finally asked. Harry's expression remained neutral. Then our relationship becomes formal rather than familial. I'll still claim the Potter seats when I reach majority, and you'll control the black seats. We'll interact as political allies when our interests align, nothing more. The cold pragmatism of this answer chilled Sirius. What had happened to James and Lily's son to make him so calculating? And if I say yes? Then you become my most trusted advisor, Harry said, his voice warming slightly. Family and truth, not just blood. With all the benefits that entails. Benefits? Harry gestured around the vault. The Potter family collected magical knowledge for centuries before my parents' deaths. Knowledge I'm rediscovering and expanding. Knowledge I'd share with you. Something in his tone made Sirius realize this was no small offer. The magical artifacts and books visible in the vault represented substantial power and wealth. I need time to think, Sirius hedged. Of course. Harry stood, moving around the desk with fluid grace. But not too much time. Events are accelerating, Sirius. By summer's end, the wizarding world will be fundamentally changed. The certainty with which he made this prediction sent another chill through Sirius. Harry spoke not with the bravado of a teenager, but with the absolute conviction of someone who controlled the future rather than merely predicted it. Where will you stay while I consider? Sirius asked. I have secure accommodations. Harry smiled slightly. Don't worry, I'm not sleeping rough. In fact, I've never been more comfortable. As they prepared to leave the vault, Harry placed a hand on Sirius's arm. 1 week, Sirius. Then I need your answer. The touch felt strangely adult, not a child seeking reassurance but a peer confirming a business arrangement. Sirius nodded wordlessly, more confused than ever about who his godson had truly become. The ancestral Potter property in Wales had been abandoned since Harry's grandparents died shortly before his birth. The once grand manor house stood partially ruined, its wards degraded by decades of neglect. Or so the ministry records claimed. In reality, Harry had spent months gradually restoring the property and its protections through specialized magic found in the Chamber of Secrets, magic specifically designed to conceal properties from official detection. Now Potter Manor hummed with renewed power, its exterior still appearing dilapidated to any passing magical or muggle observer while the interior had been restored to its former glory and modernized with both magical and muggle conveniences. The southeastern ward anchor is fully integrated, Hermione reported, entering the manor's grand study where Harry was reviewing correspondence. That completes the outer perimeter. Excellent. Harry made a notation on his ward schematic. Did Neville's shipment of Vietnamese spirit orchids arrive? This morning. He's planting them along the ward boundaries now. Hermione settled into a chair opposite him. Theo and Blaise report their families are asking pointed questions about their summer activities. As expected. Their cover stories. Holding for now. Independent research projects with Ravenclaw partners. She paused, studying the stacks of documents on Harry's desk. The ministries really escalated the search for you. There was a special evening edition of The Prophet yesterday. Boy Who Lived Goes Missing in huge print. Harry smiled slightly. Perfect timing. The public attention creates the necessary pressure. Hermione frowned. Pressure for what, exactly? You still haven't fully explained the summer agenda to everyone. Because not everyone needs to know every aspect. Harry set down his quill and gave her his full attention. The Concordium operates on a need-to-know basis, even among the inner circle. And what do I need to know? She pressed. Harry considered her for a moment. Over the past year, Hermione had proven herself repeatedly, not just intellectually, but in her willingness to push magical and ethical boundaries in pursuit of their goals. She'd become his most trusted lieutenant, the one person who knew more of his plans than anyone else. I've secured commitments from 3 members of the Wisengamot's Magical Education Committee, he revealed. They've agreed to introduce legislation reforming underage magic restrictions when the summer session begins next week. Hermione's eyes widened. That's ambitious. The restrictions on underage magic are foundational ministry policy. Which is precisely why challenging them creates the perfect opening gambit. Harry passed her a document. The proposed reforms appear modest, allowing supervised practice during holidays, exemptions for demonstrated proficiency, that sort of thing. But the legal precedent it establishes undermines the ministry's absolute control over magical education, Hermione finished, scanning the document quickly. This creates a pathway for alternative certification outside Hogwarts. Precisely. Phase 1 of dismantling the monopoly on magical instruction. Harry's eyes gleamed. Meanwhile, our activities here establish Potter Manor as an unregistered center of magical learning, the first of several we'll create over the next 3 years. Hermione looked up sharply. You're creating an alternative school system. Not yet. But laying the groundwork. Harry stood, moving to a large map of Britain mounted on the wall. The current system funnels all magical children through Hogwarts, creating a single point of control for shaping magical society. Break that monopoly. And you break the ministry's ability to control which magic is taught and who can learn it, Hermione whispered, the full implications becoming clear. It's brilliant. And incredibly dangerous. All worthwhile change involves risk, Harry said dismissively. Which brings me to your specific assignment for the next phase. He handed her another document, this one bearing the seal of the Department of Mysteries. How did you get this? She gasped, recognizing the classified marking. We have a sympathizer in the department. Harry watched her expression as she read. The register records every magical birth in Britain automatically. I need you to find a way to access it, or at minimum, to duplicate its enchantment. Hermione looked up, understanding dawning. You want to identify magical children before Hogwarts does. Before the ministry does, Harry corrected. Imagine if we could reach magical children at the first sign of accidental magic, rather than waiting for their 11th birthday. Offer their families support, information, and educational options unconstrained by outdated ministry restrictions. You'd completely bypass the system, Hermione breathed. Create an entirely separate magical community loyal to your vision rather than ministry traditions. Not separate. Better. Harry's voice took on a passionate intensity rarely displayed outside their private conversations. A community where magical talent is nurtured based on ability and interest, not arbitrary age restrictions or blood status prejudice. Where innovation is celebrated rather than feared. Hermione studied him with a mixture of admiration and concern. The Ministry will fight this with everything they have. So will Dumbledore. Of course they will. Harry returned to his desk. Established power never surrenders control willingly. The casual confidence with which he contemplated confronting Britain's most powerful magical institutions might have seemed delusional from anyone else. From Harry, it sounded like a simple statement of fact. "There's something else you should know," Hermione said after a moment. Susan overheard her aunt discussing a new task force, specifically formed to locate you and investigate your activities. They're calling it the Underage Magical Intervention Unit, but it's really about you. Harry nodded, unsurprised. Fudge's administration is predictably reactive. Who's leading it? Rufus Scrimgeour from Magical Law Enforcement, with Dolores Umbridge as Ministry Liaison. Interesting combination. Scrimgeour's competent but politically ambitious. Umbridge is a pure Ministry loyalist with blood prejudice tendencies. Harry made another note. We can use this. Their first major operation will come soon, probably within the week, once they've identified a potential location. How can you be so sure? Harry's smile held secrets. Because I've ensured they'll find one. The abandoned warehouse outside Manchester had once been used by Muggles for textile manufacturing. Now it stood empty, surrounded by chain-link fence and condemned signs, the perfect location for suspicious activity. Or so the Ministry task force believed. Heat signatures confirm multiple occupants, reported an Auror to Scrimgeour, who stood with 6 other Aurors and Dolores Umbridge at a command position 100 meters from the target. Magical detection shows active spell work inside consistent with advanced transfiguration and charms. Scrimgeour nodded grimly. Magical signatures? Inconclusive. Whoever's in there is using masking techniques. The Auror hesitated. Sir, these are sophisticated concealment methods. Not typical underage magic. Umbridge's girlish voice contrasted sharply with her hard expression. The Potter boy has demonstrated unusual abilities before. Minister Fudge has authorized maximum response. Scrimgeour frowned at her. The minister's undersecretary had no official authority over Auror operations, but her presence ensured political scrutiny of his actions. We proceed with caution, he ordered. Disillusionment charms, standard breach formation. Stunning spells only unless directly threatened. Remember, our primary target is a 14-year-old boy, regardless of his capabilities. The Aurors nodded, disillusioning themselves and moving into position around the warehouse. Umbridge remained at the command post, her pink cardigan incongruous against the industrial setting. At Scrimgeour's signal, they breached simultaneously through multiple entry points. The warehouse interior was nothing like they expected. Instead of a makeshift hideout, they found what appeared to be an improvised magical research facility. Workbenches lined the walls, covered with potion ingredients, half-finished enchanted objects, and open books. In the center, a large runic circle had been meticulously drawn on the concrete floor. Most surprisingly, the space contained not just teenagers but adults, at least 4 grown wizards working alongside what appeared to be Hogwarts students. Ministry Aurors. Nobody move. Scrimgeour ordered, dropping his disillusionment as his team surrounded the group. Instead of panic or resistance, the occupants reacted with calm precision. The adults immediately placed their wands on nearby surfaces while the younger participants stepped back from their workstations. And from behind a particularly large setup of magical equipment stepped Harry Potter himself. Director Scrimgeour, he greeted pleasantly, as if welcoming expected guests rather than a raid team. Right on schedule. May I ask what brings the head of magical law enforcement to our humble research space? Scrimgeour's eyes narrowed at the teenager's composure. Mr. Potter. You've been reported missing for nearly 2 weeks. Your guardians have no legal standing in magical matters, Harry interrupted smoothly. As my Gringotts account manager would be happy to confirm. You are an underage wizard, Umbridge said sharply, having followed the Aurors inside despite safety protocols. Performing unauthorized magic outside of school. Additionally, you appear to be leading some kind of unsanctioned gathering. Harry's expression remained pleasantly neutral, though something cold flickered in his eyes as he regarded Umbridge. I don't believe we've been introduced, he said. Dolores Umbridge, Senior Undersecretary to the Minister, she replied with forced sweetness. And you, Mr. Potter, are in serious violation of at least 6 ministry regulations. Am I? Harry gestured around the space. My colleagues and I are conducting educational research under the supervision of qualified adult wizards, in a secured location away from Muggle observation. No statute violations there. Unauthorized magic, Umbridge began. Is being performed by the adults present, Harry countered. If you check magical signatures, you'll find no spellwork originating from my wand. This was technically true. Harry had indeed performed no magic with his ministry-registered wand. His other wands and his wandless abilities were different matters entirely. Scrimgeour studied the setup with professional interest. What exactly are you researching here, Mr. Potter? Before Harry could answer, one of the adults stepped forward, a distinguished-looking wizard in his 60s whom several Aurors recognized with surprise. Educational methodologies for practical magical instruction, the man said. I'm Elphias Weatherby, former examiner for the Wizarding Examinations Authority. These young people approached me with some fascinating theories on skills acquisition that I've been helping them test. Scrimgeour's eyebrows rose. Weatherby was a respected figure in magical education circles. His presence complicated what had seemed a straightforward underage magic case. And the others? He asked, indicating the remaining adults. Specialists in various magical disciplines, Harry replied. All properly licensed and registered with the ministry. This claim was verifiable enough to create reasonable doubt, though the truth was more complex. The adults were indeed qualified magical practitioners, but their presence had been carefully orchestrated through connections Harry had cultivated over the previous year. Umbridge's face flushed with frustration. This doesn't explain your disappearance from your legal residence, Potter. The improper use of magic office has no record of this arrangement. There's no requirement to register private tutoring with the ministry, Harry pointed out. As for my residence, I've relocated to property I legally own, with the full knowledge and support of my magical guardian. Dumbledore never, Umbridge started. Albus Dumbledore is my headmaster, not my guardian, Harry corrected. Sirius Black, as my godfather and the named guardian in my parents' will, has approved these arrangements. This was stretching the truth. Sirius had not yet formally agreed to Harry's proposal, but by the time the ministry could verify this claim, Harry intended to have Sirius's full support secured. Scrimgeour, recognizing the increasingly shaky legal ground, changed tactics. Mr. Potter, regardless of technicalities, your disappearance caused significant concern. The minister himself has been following the situation. I apologize for any worry I have caused, Harry said with convincing sincerity. I've been focused on my studies and failed to appreciate how my absence might be perceived. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting with Minister Fudge to clear up any misunderstandings. The suggestion, that Harry would voluntarily meet with the minister rather than being brought in as a rule-breaker, subtly shifted the power dynamic of the confrontation. Umbridge bristled. This is not a social call, Potter. You will return to your aunt and uncle's home immediately or face. I believe that decision lies with the Director of Magical Law Enforcement, Harry interrupted, addressing Scrimgeour directly. Based on the evidence before you, sir, have I broken any actual laws? Scrimgeour studied the composed teenager thoughtfully. Potter had clearly prepared for this confrontation and managed to create enough legal ambiguity to make enforcement difficult. More importantly, forcibly returning a magically gifted minor to Muggle guardians against his will, especially one with Potter's public stature, would create political complications. No laws appear to have been broken, he admitted reluctantly. However, Mr. Potter, I must insist on a formal statement regarding your whereabouts and activities, as well as confirmation of Mr. Black's guardianship approval. Of course, Harry agreed readily. I'd be happy to provide that at your convenience. Umbridge looked apoplectic. Director Scrimgeour, the minister instructed me to locate Potter and determine if laws were being broken. Scrimgeour cut her off firmly. I've done both. Legal guardianship disputes are civil matters, not criminal ones. Harry suppressed a smile. The confrontation was proceeding exactly as he'd planned. This warehouse facility, a deliberate decoy filled with impressive but ultimately unimportant research, had served its purpose. The Ministry now believed they'd found his operation while his actual activities at Potter Manor remained completely hidden. Moreover, Scrimgeour had reacted exactly as Harry's psychological assessment had predicted. The career law enforcement officer respected technical compliance and was unwilling to overstep legal boundaries even under political pressure. Perhaps I could visit the Ministry tomorrow morning to provide that statement, Harry suggested. And bring documentation regarding my guardianship situation. Scrimgeour nodded curtly. 10 a.m., my office. He turned to his Aurors. We're done here. As the Aurors departed, a fuming Umbridge trailing behind them, Harry exchanged satisfied glances with his colleagues. Phase 1 of the summer plan was complete. The Ministry believed they had found and effectively neutralized his unauthorized activities, while his true operation continued undetected. More importantly, he'd established a direct line to Scrimgeour, a man whose support would prove valuable in the months ahead. The Ministry of Magic's atrium buzzed with whispers as Harry Potter walked confidently toward the security desk, accompanied by Sirius Black. After 2 weeks of missing child headlines in the Daily Prophet, the appearance of the boy who lived at the Ministry created an immediate sensation. Wand, please, the security wizard requested, clearly recognizing both visitors but following protocol. Harry handed over his registered wand, the one he seldom actually used anymore, while noting the increased aura presence in the atrium. Clearly, his appointment with Scrimgeour had attracted attention at the highest levels. Mr. Potter, Mr. Black. A junior Auror approached them. Director Scrimgeour asked me to escort you directly to his office. As they walked through the Ministry, Harry observed the operational details with interest: security protocols, departmental layouts, staff movements. Information that would prove useful in later phases of his plan. Sirius walked beside him, still adjusting to his new role. After their vault meeting, he'd spent 3 days deliberating before ultimately accepting Harry's proposal. The decision had been cemented when Harry demonstrated previously unknown protection measures for Grimmauld Place, ancient magic that neutralized dark artifacts without destroying them. Minister Fudge has requested to join your meeting, the Auror informed them as they neared Scrimgeour's office. How convenient, Harry remarked pleasantly, though he'd anticipated this development. Scrimgeour's office reflected its occupant's personality, organized, practical, with minimal decoration beyond commendations for service. The director himself stood as they entered, as did Minister Fudge and, predictably, Dolores Umbridge. Mr. Potter, Mr. Black, Scrimgeour greeted formally. Thank you for coming. Director, Harry replied with equal formality. Minister, Madam Umbridge. Fudge, dressed in his usual pinstriped suit with lime green bowler hat on the desk before him, smiled nervously. Harry, my boy. Quite a stir you've caused. Quite a stir indeed. An unnecessary one, I hope to demonstrate, Harry said smoothly, taking a seat when gestured to do so. The meeting proceeded much as Harry had planned. He presented documentation from Gringotts confirming his status as heir to House Potter, along with property deeds and a carefully worded statement from Sirius asserting his guardianship rights. Sirius, to his credit, played his role perfectly, the concerned but supportive godfather who had helped Harry claim his heritage. While I understand the Ministry's concern, Harry concluded after explaining his educational research project, I believe we've established that my activities fall well within legal parameters. Scrimgeour nodded slowly. The documentation appears in order. However, Mr. Potter, I must emphasize the importance of clear communication going forward. Your disappearance triggered significant ministry resources. A regrettable misunderstanding, Harry acknowledged. In fact, I'd like to propose a solution that might benefit everyone. Fudge leaned forward eagerly. Solution? A formal educational research dispensation, Harry explained. My colleagues and I are developing innovative approaches to magical instruction that could significantly benefit Britain's educational system. With ministry acknowledgement, we could continue our work transparently while sharing our findings with the Department of Magical Education. The suggestion was calculated to appeal to Fudge's political instincts. If Harry's group produced genuine educational innovations, the minister could claim credit for supporting them. If not, the dispensation could be revoked with minimal political cost. Interesting proposition, Fudge mused, clearly seeing the potential benefits to his administration. Umbridge, however, wasn't so easily swayed. Minister, I must advise against any special treatment for Mr. Potter. The regulations regarding underage magic exist for important safety reasons. Which is why adult supervision is integral to our research, Harry countered smoothly. As Director Scrimgeour's team observed yesterday, all practical magic is performed under qualified oversight. Sirius added his support. As Harry's guardian, I've reviewed their research protocols personally. They're actually more rigorous than Hogwarts safety standards. The debate continued for another 20 minutes, with Umbridge raising increasingly technical objections that Harry calmly dismantled. Throughout, he maintained the demeanor of a respectful but confident student researcher rather than revealing his true agenda. Finally, Fudge made his decision. I believe a provisional research dispensation would be appropriate, with quarterly reviews by the Department of Magical Education. He turned to Umbridge. Dolores, please draft the necessary paperwork for my signature. Umbridge's smile remained fixed while her eyes flashed with frustration. Of course, Minister. As the meeting concluded, Scrimgeour held Harry back briefly. Impressive presentation, Mr. Potter. Almost as impressive as your maneuvering to reach this outcome. Harry met the director's shrewd gaze directly. I'm not sure what you mean, sir. I think you do. Scrimgeour's voice lowered. Your decoy facility was convincing but not quite perfect. Too carefully prepared. Too convenient. Rather than deny it, Harry simply asked, and yet you chose not to mention your suspicions to the minister. The law is the law, Scrimgeour replied simply. You've technically complied with it, whatever your actual activities may be. He paused. For now. The implicit warning was clear, but so was something else, a hint of reluctant respect. Scrimgeour was a law enforcement professional first and foremost, but he was also politically astute enough to recognize a rising power. I appreciate your professionalism, Director, Harry said sincerely. And I hope we can maintain a productive relationship in the future. As Harry departed with Sirius, he mentally adjusted his assessment of Scrimgeour. The man would bear watching closely, not just as a potential obstacle but as a possible future ally once his political ambitions inevitably led him beyond his current position. Phase 2 was now complete, official ministry recognition of his research group, which would provide perfect cover for his actual operations while simultaneously creating legitimate channels for introducing his innovations into the mainstream magical education system. Potter Manor's ballroom had been transformed into a training facility unlike anything found at Hogwarts. 20 members of the Concordium moved through complex magical exercises in pairs and small groups, practicing spells far beyond standard curriculum. Harry walked among them, observing and occasionally correcting technique. Some worked on advanced shield variations, others on silent casting, still others on specialized charms and transfiguration sequences Harry had designed. Marcus, lower your wand angle 5 degrees on the second movement, he instructed a 6th-year Slytherin struggling with a particularly difficult countercurse. You're overcasting at the apex. The older boy adjusted his technique, and the spell suddenly flowed correctly, producing a shimmering violet barrier that absorbed the test hex completely. Better, Harry approved. Practice that sequence 10 more times, then move to the combat application. Nearby, Hermione was coaching several Ravenclaws on a modified memory enhancement charm, one of Harry's innovations that improved recall without the dangerous side effects of traditional memory potions. Her expertise in this area had grown tremendously over the summer. Impressive progress, Harry commented as he joined her after completing his rounds. Especially Boot and Patil. Hermione nodded. They've taken to your modified casting technique remarkably well. Most of them have increased their spell efficiency by at least 30%. And the ministry research? Harry asked quietly. Productive. I've identified 3 possible approaches to replicating the register's enchantment. She hesitated. I'll need access to the Department of Mysteries to test them, though. Harry smiled slightly. Already arranged. You'll have a visitor pass next Tuesday, ostensibly for a student tour of the administrative sections. Hermione's eyebrows rose. How did you manage that? Augustus Rookwood still has connections in the department, despite his disgrace. He was quite amenable to assisting when properly motivated. The casual reference to leveraging a former Death Eater's resources might once have disturbed Hermione. Now she simply nodded, accepting it as part of Harry's comprehensive approach to gathering allies across all segments of magical society. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Draco Malfoy, who approached with uncharacteristic urgency. Potter, we need to talk. Draco glanced meaningfully at the other students. Privately. Harry led them to his study, activating privacy wards as they entered. What's happened? My father received a visitor last night. Draco's typically composed demeanor showed cracks of genuine concern. A witch he'd never met before, but who knew details about our family that aren't public knowledge. Harry's interest sharpened immediately. Description: dark hair, Eastern European accent. Expensive robes but old-fashioned cut. Father said she carried herself like old nobility rather than new money. Harry exchanged a glance with Hermione, who had also connected this description to the mysterious figure from the Hogsmeade Dementor incident. What did she want? Harry asked. Information about you, Draco replied. Specifically, about your gathering of talents, as she called it. She seemed to know about the Concordium, though not by name. This was troubling news. The Concordium's existence was supposed to be known only to its members and a few carefully selected adult allies. How did your father respond? Cautiously. He claimed limited knowledge. Draco hesitated. But afterward, he was shaken. Said something about ghosts that should have remained buried, and doubled the manor's security wards. Harry considered this information carefully. The timing was significant. This contact had come just as his ministry maneuver had succeeded, suggesting the mysterious witch was monitoring his activities closely. Did she identify herself or her interests? Hermione asked. Not directly. But she left this. Draco removed a small object from his pocket, an ornate silver pin bearing a symbol Harry recognized immediately. Grindelwald's mark, he said quietly. The symbol, a triangle enclosing a circle bisected by a line, was officially known as the sign of the Deathly Hallows, but had become notorious as Gellert Grindelwald's personal emblem during his reign of terror in the 1940s. Impossible, Hermione whispered. Grindelwald has been imprisoned in Nurmengard for decades. His movement, however, was never completely eradicated, Harry noted. Particularly in Eastern Europe. He took the pin, examining it closely before detecting subtle magic embedded in the silver. A tracking charm, but an unusual variant that would activate only under specific magical conditions. Clever, he murmured. She wanted this brought to me. It's a message and a test. What kind of test? Draco asked. To see if I recognize the magical signature and how I respond to it. Harry placed the pin on his desk rather than destroying it. She's evaluating whether I'm worthy of attention. The implication hung in the air, attention from whatever remained of Grindelwald's organization. An organization that had once nearly succeeded in overthrowing the International Statute of Secrecy and subjugating the Muggle world. This changes our timeline, Harry decided. The international phase needs to accelerate. Hermione frowned. We're not ready. The ministry position is barely secured, and Dumbledore's still watching closely. We don't have the luxury of perfect preparation anymore. Harry's eyes gleamed with intensity. If Grindelwald's followers are resurfacing and showing interest in our activities, others will follow. We need to establish our position firmly before competing factions complicate the landscape. Draco looked between them, sensing decisions being made that went beyond what even the inner circle usually discussed. What do you need from me? He asked simply. Harry regarded him thoughtfully. Draco had proven his loyalty repeatedly over the past year, evolving from a reluctant ally to a committed lieutenant. His family connections remained valuable, but his personal abilities had developed significantly under Harry's guidance. I need you to accept a more visible role, Harry decided. As our public representative to certain pureblood factions. It will place you in a precarious position with your father. Draco straightened, his chin lifting slightly. I can handle my father. Good. Because after today, there's no going back for any of us. Harry turned to Hermione. Initiate the revelation protocol. It's time our members understood exactly what they're part of. Her eyes widened. All of it? Even the Ascension Project? Everything except my personal origin, Harry confirmed. They've earned the truth about our real objectives. As Hermione left to gather the full Concordium, Harry activated a complex sequence of runes embedded in his desk. A hidden compartment opened, revealing a small black journal, Salazar Slytherin's personal record of the founding of Hogwarts and his vision for magical education. What exactly are we doing here, Potter? Draco asked quietly. What is this really all about? Harry looked up, his green eyes reflecting an ancient knowledge that had always disturbed Draco on some primal level. Revolution, Draco. Not with wands and violence like Voldemort or Grindelwald, but with ideas and systems. We're creating an alternative to everything the Ministry has built, everything they've used to control magic itself for centuries. He stood, gathering the materials he would need to finally reveal his true vision to his followers. By the time they realize what's happening, it will be too late to stop us. The room of requirement at Hogwarts had transformed into an exact replica of Potter Manor's Grand Hall, an impressive feat of magic that demonstrated Harry's growing control over the castle's semi-sentient spaces. With the fall term 2 weeks away, he had brought the entire Concordium back to Hogwarts early through a series of carefully timed portkeys. 40 students now filled the hall, representing all 4 houses and every year from 2nd through 7th. What had begun as Harry's small study group had evolved into a comprehensive organization with specialized divisions focused on different aspects of magical research and application. Today marks a transition, Harry began, standing before them with Hermione and the other inner circle members flanking him. Until now, you've known the Concordium as a research collective focused on educational improvement and magical innovation. He paced slowly, making eye contact with key members. That definition was accurate but incomplete. The time has come for full transparency about our true purpose and the changes already underway in magical Britain. For the next hour, Harry outlined the comprehensive vision that had guided his actions since first year. He explained the fundamental flaws in the Ministry's approach to magical governance, the artificial restrictions on certain branches of magic, the deliberately limited curriculum at Hogwarts, the system of control masquerading as protection. The trace isn't about safety, he told them. It's about preventing young witches and wizards from developing magical independence before they've been properly indoctrinated into Ministry-approved thinking. He revealed the summer's achievements, the educational research dispensation that provided legal cover, the network of adult allies being cultivated in key positions, the restoration of Potter Manor as an alternative magical instruction site. Throughout the presentation, he watched their reactions carefully. Some, particularly the older students, showed signs of concern at the scope and ambition of his plans. Others, especially those who had experienced ministry prejudice or restrictions personally, displayed growing excitement. "What you're describing," said a sixth-year Hufflepuff hesitantly, "it sounds like creating a parallel magical government." "Not a government," Harry corrected. "A community. One based on magical merit and innovation rather than blood status or political connections. One where knowledge isn't classified as dark simply because it's powerful." "The Ministry will never allow it," objected a skeptical Ravenclaw. "Neither will Dumbledore." "They already have," Harry countered. "Each step has been technically legal, each move carefully positioned as educational reform rather than systemic challenge. By the time they recognize the pattern, our foundation will be too firmly established to dismantle." He moved to a large visualization board where complex magical projections displayed interconnected networks of influence and resources. "Phase 1 established our core group and knowledge base," he explained. "Phase 2, completed this summer, secured ministry recognition and protection. Phase 3, beginning now, expands our reach beyond Britain and introduces our first major magical innovations to the public." The projections shifted to show international connections spanning Europe and beyond. Durmstrang, Beaux Batons, the Brazilian Magical Institute, each has already expressed interest in our educational methods. The International Confederation of Wizards has approved our request to present at their December conference. Hermione stepped forward. "We've already developed 7 distinct magical innovations that significantly improve on current practices, from the memory enhancement charm you've been learning to a revolutionized approach to protective warding. And that's just the beginning," Harry continued. "The research you've all contributed to is laying groundwork for more significant breakthroughs, magic that hasn't been seen in Britain for centuries, if ever." As the presentation concluded, Harry opened the floor for questions. They came rapidly, ranging from practical concerns about ministry opposition to deeper philosophical questions about the ethics of creating what amounted to a separate magical society. Harry addressed each one directly, never sugarcoating the challenges or risks while emphasizing the transformative potential of their work. Throughout, he demonstrated the leadership quality that had drawn them to him in the first place, absolute confidence combined with detailed planning and a compelling vision. Finally, he came to the most important part of the revelation. "Until now, membership in the Concordium has been relatively informal," he said. "That changes today. What I'm about to share involves magical principles the Ministry classifies as restricted. Continuing with us means accepting that classification and its potential consequences." He paused, letting the implications sink in. "Anyone who wishes to depart now may do so with no negative repercussions. Your memories of specific research will be modified for your protection, but your general educational benefits will remain intact." A tense silence fell over the hall. After a moment, 3 students, 2 Ravenclaws and a Hufflepuff, stood and quietly moved to the door. "A wise and honorable choice," Harry acknowledged, respecting their decision. "The rest of you, please stand." As the remaining 37 students rose, Harry activated a complex runic array hidden beneath the hall's floor. Golden light spread outward in geometric patterns, connecting each participant in a web of magical energy. "The Concordium Oath isn't like an unbreakable vow," he explained as the magic rose around them. "It doesn't punish or kill those who break it. Instead, it creates a magical consensus, a shared purpose that enhances our collective abilities while protecting our community's knowledge." The oath ceremony that followed was unlike anything taught at Hogwarts. Based on principles found in Slytherin's private texts but modified by Harry to remove blood purity elements, it created a magical network linking the participants without subjugating their individual wills. When completed, each member felt a subtle but unmistakable connection to the others, not mind-reading, but a general sense of presence and shared purpose. "What you're feeling is ancient magic," Harry told them as the golden light faded. The kind of connection that once bound magical communities before the Ministry fragmented them for easier control. The kind of magic we're working to restore to its rightful place. As the ceremony concluded and the members broke into discussion groups to digest what they'd learned, Hermione joined Harry at the edge of the hall. "They've accepted it better than I expected," she observed. "Even the pure-blood traditionalists." "Because I've given each faction what they truly want," Harry replied. "The progressives see expanded opportunities and elimination of prejudice. The traditionalists see a return to magical practices the Ministry has suppressed. The academically inclined see unprecedented research freedom." "And what do you see, Harry?" she asked quietly. His green eyes gleamed with something ancient and powerful. "The beginning of a transformation that will eventually render the current magical world unrecognizable." Before Hermione could respond, a distinctive magical pulse resonated through the room, an alarm from one of the monitoring charms Harry had placed throughout the castle. "Dumbledore's returned early," he noted, checking a small enchanted device. "And he's looking for us." Hermione tensed. "How much does he know?" "Enough to be concerned, not enough to act decisively." Harry made a quick decision. "Initiate dispersal protocol. Everyone returns to their dormitories through the passage network. Inner circle stays behind." As the main group filed out through concealed passages Harry had discovered in the Chamber of Secrets, routes unknown even to Hogwarts professors, he prepared for the confrontation he'd been anticipating for months. Dumbledore had been relatively hands-off during the previous year, watching from a distance while gathering information. That approach was clearly ending. The timing, immediately after the Concordium's oath ceremony, couldn't be coincidence. Something had changed in the broader magical landscape. Something that had finally pushed the headmaster to direct intervention. "He won't come alone," Harry warned the inner circle, Hermione, Draco, Blaise, Theo, Luna, Neville, and Susan. "Be respectful but firm. Remember, we've broken no school rules since we're here on official research business with Ministry approval." The room of requirements entrance shimmered, indicating someone was about to enter. Harry adjusted its permissions, allowing access while maintaining their current configuration. The door opened to reveal Albus Dumbledore, accompanied by Professors McGonagall, Snape, and Flitwick. The headmaster's usual twinkle was notably absent, his expression grave as he surveyed the elaborate hall and the small group of students standing calmly before him. "Harry," Dumbledore greeted, his voice carrying none of its usual warmth. "I see you've made yourself at home at Hogwarts rather earlier than term requires." "Headmaster," Harry replied politely. "We're here under the educational research dispensation granted by Minister Fudge. The castle recognized our authorization and admitted us." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly. "The castle recognized your authorization." An interesting choice of words for a student, however exceptional. "Merely accurate," Harry responded. "Hogwarts' founding charter includes provisions for approved research activities outside normal term time. We filed the appropriate documentation with the Board of Governors." McGonagall stepped forward, her Scottish accent more pronounced in her evident displeasure. "Mr. Potter, while the minister may have granted some form of research dispensation, returning to Hogwarts without notifying the administration is completely unacceptable." "We notified the Board of Governors," Draco interjected smoothly. "As the governing body for Hogwarts facilities, their approval supersedes administrative notification requirements." Snape's eyes narrowed at this carefully prepared legal argument. "How convenient that you've suddenly become experts in educational bureaucracy, Mr. Malfoy. 10 points from Slytherin for insufferable pedantry." "Term hasn't started, Professor," Hermione pointed out calmly. "House points aren't active yet." The tension in the room ratcheted higher as the professors realized these students had prepared meticulously for this confrontation, finding and exploiting every technical loophole available. Dumbledore, however, seemed more concerned with the room itself than the bureaucratic argument. His eyes moved over the runic pattern still faintly visible on the floor, patterns that any skilled magical scholar would recognize as far more complex than standard educational charms. "What exactly is the nature of your research, Harry?" he asked quietly. "Educational methodology enhancement," Harry replied truthfully if incompletely. "We've been developing improved techniques for magical instruction and skill development. And these techniques required loyalty oaths." Dumbledore gestured to the fading runic array. Harry's expression remained neutral, though inwardly he noted that Dumbledore had recognized the purpose of the ritual. The headmaster was more knowledgeable about ancient magical practices than he typically revealed. "Not loyalty oaths, Professor. Collaborative enhancement charms. They improve cooperative spellcasting, a skill notably absent from the Hogwarts curriculum despite its historical significance in magical development." Flitwick, despite his evident concern, couldn't help showing professional interest. "Cooperative casting fell out of favor centuries ago. The magical theory required is extraordinarily complex. Which is precisely why we're researching it," Hermione added. "Modern magical education emphasizes individual casting almost exclusively, limiting potential in combined spellwork." The discussion was proceeding exactly as Harry had planned, redirecting from questions about authority and permission toward academic debate, where their preparation gave them significant advantage. Dumbledore, however, wasn't so easily diverted. "Harry, may I speak with you privately?" "Of course, Headmaster," Harry agreed readily. "Though as the Ministry-approved research lead, I'd like Ms. Granger to join us, if that's acceptable." The request, framed as professional courtesy rather than demand, placed Dumbledore in an awkward position. Refusing would undermine his image as a reasonable authority figure, while accepting gave Harry the support of his most trusted lieutenant. "Very well," Dumbledore conceded. "Minerva, Severus, Filius, perhaps you could escort the other students to the Great Hall for refreshments while we chat." The other professors, though clearly reluctant, guided the remaining students out. Only Draco glanced back, exchanging a brief meaningful look with Harry before departing. Once alone, the room transformed at Harry's subtle direction, becoming a smaller, more comfortable space with 3 chairs arranged near a fireplace. The change, executed without verbal command or obvious magic, was not lost on Dumbledore. "Your control of Hogwarts magic has developed remarkably," the headmaster observed as they sat. "Few adult wizards achieve such affinity with the castle." "The room responds to clear intent," Harry replied modestly. "Nothing extraordinary." "We both know that's not true, Harry." Dumbledore's blue eyes had lost their characteristic twinkle entirely. "Just as we both know that educational research only partially describes what you've been cultivating here and at Potter Manor this summer." So Dumbledore had been monitoring the manor despite its protections. "Interesting, but not unexpected. Our research has multiple applications," Harry acknowledged. "Some educational, some more broadly focused on magical theory and practice. Including magical practices the Ministry classifies as restricted," Dumbledore noted. "Ancient binding rituals, cooperative channeling, modified wardcraft. Magic that was regulated for good reasons, Harry." "Regulated to maintain control, you mean," Harry countered, dropping the pretense of simple academic interest. "Restricted not because it's inherently harmful but because it empowers magical communities independent of centralized authority." Dumbledore sighed heavily. "I see Salazar's library has influenced your perspective significantly." Harry didn't bother asking how Dumbledore knew about his access to Slytherin's private collection. The headmaster had been at Hogwarts for decades and likely knew more about the castle's secrets than he typically revealed. "Knowledge isn't inherently dark or light, Headmaster. Intent determines ethical application. A convenient philosophy when acquiring potentially dangerous knowledge," Dumbledore replied. "And what exactly is your intent, Harry? What does the Concordium truly aim to accomplish?" The directness of the question deserved an equally direct answer. Harry exchanged a glance with Hermione, who nodded slightly. "Magical reformation," Harry stated simply. The creation of an educational and social framework that transcends the artificial limitations imposed by the ministry's classification system. A return to merit-based magical development rather than politically motivated restrictions. An admirably academic description for what amounts to a parallel magical government, Dumbledore observed, echoing the Hufflepuff student's earlier concern with uncanny accuracy. Not a government, Harry corrected again. A community. One that recognizes magical potential regardless of blood status, age, or creature classification. And one led by you, Dumbledore added softly. A 14-year-old boy with extraordinary abilities and knowledge that seems to extend far beyond his years or educational opportunities. The implied question hung in the air between them. Hermione tensed slightly, but Harry remained perfectly composed. I merely provide direction and coordination, he replied. The Concordium operates through consensus, not hierarchy. A consensus guided by your vision, Dumbledore countered. Harry, I've watched your development with growing concern. Your magical abilities, your influence over your peers, your seemingly instinctive understanding of magical principles that confound adult wizards, these aren't typical prodigy traits. Harry met the headmaster's penetrating gaze without flinching. Perhaps your definition of typical needs revision, Professor. History shows that magical innovation rarely comes from those who adhere to established limitations. And rarely without cost, Dumbledore added gravely. Magical breakthroughs achieved too quickly often extract terrible prices from their creators or those around them. A risk we address through collaborative methodology and rigorous testing, Hermione interjected. Our approach is fundamentally different from the isolated experimentation that historically led to disaster. Dumbledore turned his attention to her. Ms. Granger, your intelligence has always been exceptional. But I wonder if you've fully considered the implications of what you're helping to build. I've considered them more thoroughly than the Ministry considered the implications of classifying all non-human magical beings as creatures regardless of intelligence, she responded with unexpected heat. Or the implications of forcing underage witches and wizards to suppress their magic for months each summer, creating psychological and developmental issues. Her passionate defense surprised both men, though Harry felt a surge of pride at her articulation of principles they'd discussed extensively. Your concerns have merit, Dumbledore acknowledged. The magical world is indeed imperfect, with many outdated practices in need of reform. But Harry's approach, he paused, choosing his words carefully. The pattern emerging concerns me deeply. Not just the magic itself, but the structure being created around it. The loyalty rituals, the compartmentalized knowledge, the careful political positioning. You think I'm becoming Voldemort, Harry stated flatly. The bluntness of the statement caused even Dumbledore to blink in surprise. Not Voldemort, he replied carefully. But perhaps something equally concerning in different ways. Voldemort sought dominance through fear and violence. You appear to be building influence through knowledge and carefully cultivated loyalty. The methods differ, but the centralization of power has troubling parallels. Harry leaned forward, his green eyes suddenly intense in a way that reminded Dumbledore uncomfortably of another student from decades past, though not Tom Riddle. Let me be perfectly clear, Headmaster. I have no interest in domination, magical supremacy, or power for its own sake. What I'm building is an alternative to the failed systems that allowed Dark Lords to rise repeatedly throughout magical history. He gestured between them. Look at the pattern. Grindelwald rises, you defeat him, peace for a generation. Then Voldemort emerges, a child stops him temporarily, he returns eventually. Why? Because the underlying conditions that create Dark Lords, the suppression of magical knowledge, the marginalization of magical groups, the stagnation of magical innovation, remain unchanged. Dumbledore's expression grew troubled. You speak as if Voldemort has already returned. Hasn't he? Harry countered. In some form. We both know what happened with Quirrell in my first year. We both know it's only a matter of time before he regains physical form. And you believe your alternative community will prevent this cycle from continuing? I believe knowledge freely shared and properly understood prevents its weaponization, Harry said firmly. I believe magical beings treated with equality and dignity don't flock to extremist movements promising recognition. And I believe innovation flourishing openly doesn't get driven underground where it festers into destructive applications. The passion and conviction in his voice was genuine, one of the few times he'd spoken to Dumbledore without careful calculation dominating his presentation. After a long moment, Dumbledore sighed. Your ideals are admirable, Harry. But I remain concerned about methods and means. History is littered with well-intentioned movements that evolved in dangerous directions. Then help guide us, Harry suggested, offering what appeared to be an olive branch. Your experience and wisdom would be valuable in ensuring our development remains ethical and beneficial. The offer, while seemingly reasonable, was a calculated move. Either Dumbledore would accept, giving the Concordium the legitimacy of his tacit approval, or refuse, allowing Harry to later claim he had sought the headmaster's guidance only to be rejected. Dumbledore recognized the elegant trap immediately. An intriguing proposal. Perhaps we could establish regular discussions about your research directions and methodologies. We'd welcome your insights, Harry agreed smoothly, knowing such discussions would give him valuable information about Dumbledore's own knowledge and concerns while revealing only what Harry chose to share. As the meeting concluded with tentative arrangements for future consultations, neither side was under any illusion about what had really transpired. The first direct confrontation between Harry's emerging power structure and Dumbledore's traditional authority had ended in a carefully choreographed stalemate. But as Harry and Hermione departed, Dumbledore remained in the room of requirement, studying the fading runic patterns with growing concern. The magic Harry had employed wasn't just advanced. It contained elements the headmaster had seen only once before, decades ago, in the work of a brilliant but troubled young wizard who had briefly been his closest companion. Magic that should have been lost when Grindelwald was defeated. The coincidence, coming just as reports reached Dumbledore of movement among Grindelwald's old supporters in Eastern Europe, was too significant to ignore. Something far more complex than a talented student's ambition was unfolding at Hogwarts. And Albus Dumbledore feared he might already be too late to contain it. The first manifestation of the mysterious which occurred 3 weeks into the fall term, as Harry had anticipated. The timing, during a Hogsmeade weekend with most of the staff and older students away from the castle, suggested detailed knowledge of Hogwarts' operational patterns. Harry was in the library's restricted section, having gained permanent access through his ministry research dispensation, when he sensed a subtle disturbance in the castle's magical field. Not an intrusion exactly, but a resonance, someone attuned to Hogwarts magic in ways few living wizards could achieve. Closing the ancient text he'd been studying, Harry moved silently through the deserted library, following the magical disturbance toward the astronomy tower. His wand remained in its holster, his most effective defenses wouldn't require it. The woman waiting at the top of the tower matched Draco's description perfectly, dark hair with silver streaks, aristocratic features, expensive robes of an old-fashioned European cut. She stood looking out over the grounds, apparently unconcerned about being discovered. I wondered when you'd make a direct approach, Harry said calmly, stepping onto the tower platform. The Dementors, the Pin, the probes of our outer wards, all rather indirect for someone of your capabilities, miss. She turned, studying him with eyes that held the weight of decades despite her relatively youthful appearance. Magdalene Calvert, though that name means nothing to you, she replied in an accent that confirmed her Eastern European origins. Once, I was Magdalene Reinhardt, apprentice to Gellert Grindelwald. Now I'm simply an interested observer of your fascinating development. Harry maintained a neutral expression despite the significance of this confirmation. Grindelwald had been notorious for accepting only the most magically gifted as personal apprentices. If this woman was genuine, she represented a connection to magical knowledge thought lost decades ago. Grindelwald has been imprisoned for over 50 years, Harry noted. His movement disbanded. She smiled slightly. Movements built on powerful ideas never truly disband, Mr. Potter. They simply evolve. As you well know, given your own organizational activities. What exactly do you want, Ms. Reinhardt? Harry asked directly. Understanding, she replied, moving closer with fluid grace that suggested combat training. You intrigue me. A child who should be preparing for Quidditch matches and Hogsmeade visits is instead building a sophisticated magical network with innovations that echo principles my former master developed. She stopped a few paces away, her eyes examining him with uncomfortable intensity. Principles that were never published or shared outside his inner circle. The implication was clear, she suspected Harry had somehow accessed Grindelwald's restricted magical knowledge. Parallel development occurs throughout magical history, Harry responded smoothly. Similar problems often yield similar solutions when approached with sufficient insight. Perhaps, she acknowledged. Or perhaps there's a more direct explanation for your precocious understanding of magic that hasn't been practiced openly in Britain for generations. Her hand moved in a complex pattern, and suddenly the air between them shimmered with a diagnostic spell Harry recognized as an extremely advanced magical resonance detector, one specifically designed to identify trace signatures of possession or consciousness transfer. He allowed it to wash over him, knowing his defenses would reveal only what he chose to show, the surface connection to Voldemort through his scar, but nothing of the complete consciousness merger that had occurred at age 3. Interesting, she murmured as the spell completed. You carry a connection to Tom Riddle, as rumored. But there's something else, something older and more complex. Harry redirected smoothly. You still haven't explained your interest, Ms. Reinhardt. Grindelwald's imprisonment continues, his movement largely forgotten except in history books. Why emerge now to contact a Hogwarts student? Because history moves in cycles, Mr. Potter. And we are approaching the convergence of several significant ones. She gestured toward the Forbidden Forest. The signs are everywhere for those trained to recognize them. Magical disturbances in ancient sites. Creature migrations changing patterns established for centuries. And at the center, a child with power that defies conventional explanation. Her voice took on a more intense quality. Gellert foresaw this moment. A realignment of magical forces creating opportunity for fundamental change. He believed it would come in the early decades of the new millennium, centered on Britain. And you believe I'm part of this prophecy? Harry asked skeptically, though inwardly he filed away this information for later analysis. I believe you're a catalyst, she corrected. Whether by design or accident, your activities are accelerating magical developments that would normally take decades. The question is whether you understand the forces you're setting in motion. The conversation had taken an unexpected turn. Harry had anticipated recruitment, threats, or demands, not philosophical discussion of magical convergence cycles and prophetic interpretation. I understand that magical society needs fundamental reform, he replied cautiously. That the artificial constraints imposed by ministries and traditional educational systems are preventing magical development rather than protecting it. She smiled, seeming pleased by his answer. Then perhaps our interests align more than either of us initially assumed. That depends on your actual interests, Harry countered. Grindelwald's vision involved magical domination over muggles and concentration of power among a magical elite. Neither approach interests me. Gellert's methods reflected his era, she said dismissively. The specific implementation is less important than the fundamental principle, that magic itself should determine hierarchy, not arbitrary restrictions or political maneuvering. This was closer to Harry's own philosophy than he had expected from Grindelwald's follower. Still, he maintained his cautious approach. And what exactly are you proposing? An alliance? Exchange of information? For now, simply communication. She removed a small crystal from her robes. This will allow secure contact between us when needed. I have information about magical developments beyond Britain's borders that may prove relevant to your Concordium, I believe you call it. The fact that she knew the organization's name confirmed Harry's suspicion that someone within his outer circle had leaked information. He accepted the crystal without comment, knowing he could examine it thoroughly for tracking or compulsion charms before deciding whether to use it. And in exchange, he asked. Your perspective on certain magical innovations you've developed. Particularly your modifications to consciousness-affecting spells and cooperative magical channeling. Her eyes gleamed with genuine academic interest. Your approach differs from traditional methods in ways that suggest either remarkable innovation or access to lost knowledge. The request was specific enough to confirm she had detailed intelligence about his research, yet framed as scholarly exchange rather than extraction of secrets. I'll consider it, Harry said noncommittally. She nodded, apparently satisfied with this response. One final observation, Mr. Potter, before I depart. You've built an impressive organization with remarkable speed, but your visibility has increased proportionally. Others beyond myself have noticed your activities, some with far less academic interest in your innovations. Voldemort's remaining supporters, Harry suggested. Among others. The magical world is rarely as binary as Britain's light-dark paradigm suggests. She moved toward the edge of the tower. Powerful magic attracts powerful attention. Be prepared for visitors less interested in conversation than I am. Before Harry could respond, she stepped off the tower edge, not falling but dissolving into a swirl of dark smoke that rapidly dispersed into the afternoon sky. Transportation magic unlike anything taught at Hogwarts or mentioned in ministry-approved texts. Harry remained motionless for several minutes, processing the encounter. Magdalene Reinhardt represented a variable he hadn't fully anticipated, a connection to magical traditions outside British influence but with specific interest in Britain's future. More concerning was her reference to others who had noticed his activities. The implications were clear. The Concordium's growth had attracted attention beyond what Harry had planned for at this stage. The timeline would need adjustment again. Certain security measures previously scheduled for implementation next year would need to be accelerated immediately. As he descended from the tower, Harry's mind was already reformulating plans. The encounter, while potentially dangerous, also offered unexpected opportunities. Grindelwald's magical knowledge had been largely lost after his defeat. Access to even portions of it could accelerate certain aspects of Harry's research significantly. The risk, of course, was revealing too much of his own capabilities and intentions to an unknown factor. Reinhardt's motivations remained unclear despite her seemingly academic interest. What was clear, however, was that the game had expanded beyond Britain's borders sooner than expected. International players were taking positions, watching and evaluating. The Concordium would need to respond accordingly. She was definitely genuine, Harry concluded, addressing the inner circle gathered in their Chamber of Secrets headquarters. The magical signature she demonstrated matches historical records of Grindelwald's specialized transportation techniques. Which means Grindelwald's knowledge base didn't die with his defeat, Theo noted, looking troubled. His apprentices preserved and likely expanded it. The question is what they want with us, Blaise said pragmatically. Philosophical alignment seems unlikely given our different approaches to Muggle relations. Harry paced the circular meeting table where 7 members of his most trusted group sat reviewing the information from his encounter with Reinhardt. The 8th chair, reserved for Sirius, who was handling Wizengamot matters, stood empty. I believe her interest is primarily magical rather than ideological, Harry assessed. Grindelwald's core philosophy involved magical supremacy, but his most innovative work focused on consciousness manipulation and collective magical amplification, areas where our research has made significant advances. So she wants to steal our breakthroughs, Draco suggested bluntly. Or contribute to them, Hermione countered. We shouldn't dismiss potential allies simply because of historical associations. Our own group includes members with Death Eater family connections, after all. Draco frowned but didn't argue the point. His own father's past activities made contesting Hermione's observation difficult. Either way, this changes our security posture, Harry decided. Phase 4 implementation moves forward immediately rather than waiting for winter break. This announcement caused visible surprise around the table. Phase 4 involved the most controversial aspects of their long-term plan, directly challenging certain ministry restrictions through public demonstration rather than behind-the-scenes maneuvering. That's extremely risky, Susan objected. My aunt says the ministry is already creating a special committee to review your research dispensation. Moving more aggressively now will only accelerate their response. Which is exactly what we need, Harry replied. The ministry's attention is currently divided between our activities, serious as Wisengamot reform proposals, and international developments they don't fully understand. Forcing them to respond publicly commits them to positions they'll struggle to defend later. Classic destabilization strategy, Blaise observed with reluctant admiration. Force reaction before they can fully coordinate. But what about Dumbledore? Neville asked. After your meeting last month, he's been watching all of us more closely. Luna says he's even consulted Professor Trelawney about convergent magical cycles or something similar. Harry turned to Luna, who nodded dreamily. He's very concerned about astronomical alignments this winter. The centaurs have been avoiding him because his aura is distressed. Most would dismiss Luna's observations as fanciful, but Harry had learned to recognize the genuine insights buried in her unique perspective. If Dumbledore was consulting Trelawney and the centaurs, he was clearly connecting Reinhardt's appearance to broader magical patterns. Dumbledore suspects what's coming, but he's constrained by his positions as headmaster and supreme mugwump, Harry analyzed. He can't move openly against students with ministry research approval without compromising his own authority. And he's reluctant to fully oppose us without understanding our ultimate objectives. Which we should probably clarify for ourselves, Hermione interjected. The revelation covered our educational and social reform goals, but Phase 4 goes beyond that. What exactly are we trying to accomplish with public demonstration? Harry stopped pacing, facing his inner circle directly. This was the moment to share the final element of his vision, the aspect he'd withheld even from them until now. The complete restructuring of magical society's relationship with magic itself, he stated simply. Not just educational reform or political realignment, but fundamental change in how magical humans access, develop and implement their abilities. He activated the table's embedded runic array, causing a three-dimensional magical model to appear above them, an intricate representation of intertwined magical channels and nodes. This is the current structure of magical education and development in Britain, he explained, indicating the constricted pathways and bottlenecks throughout the system. Magic flows through predetermined channels, controlled at key points by ministry regulations, Wisengamot oversight and traditional limitations. With a gesture, the model transformed, the channels widening and multiplying, new connections forming between previously separated nodes. This is what we're creating. A system where magical development follows natural affinity rather than imposed structure. Where arbitrary classifications of light and dark are replaced by ethical application guidelines based on actual effects rather than ministry bias. The implications were revolutionary. Not just reform of existing structures but their complete replacement with an entirely different approach to magical development and governance. You're talking about dismantling the international statute of secrecy, Susan whispered, recognizing the logical endpoint of such fundamental change. Eventually, yes, Harry acknowledged. But not in the way Grindelwald envisioned, with magical dominance over Muggles. Rather, through controlled integration beginning with Muggle families of magical children and expanding gradually as cultural adaptation allows. The silence that followed was profound. Even the inner circle, who had accepted increasingly radical ideas over the past 3 years, seemed taken aback by the scope of this ultimate vision. That's beyond ambitious, Theo finally said. It's revolutionary on a scale that makes Voldemort's agenda look provincial. It's also fundamentally necessary, Harry countered. The magical world is stagnating while Muggle development accelerates. The Statute of Secrecy was implemented in the 17th century when the technological gap between magical and non-magical communities was relatively small. That gap has widened exponentially in the modern era. He gestured to another section of the model. Within 50 years, Muggle technology will make maintaining the statute virtually impossible. We're approaching a critical decision point, controlled, gradual integration on our terms, or eventual forced exposure on theirs. The analysis was sobering. Most wizard-raised members of the group had little understanding of how rapidly Muggle technology was advancing, but Hermione and other Muggle-raised students had been briefing them over the past year. The first public demonstration, Harry continued, bringing the discussion back to immediate plans, will focus on the most visibly arbitrary restriction in current magical regulation, the trace and underage magic limitations. He outlined the demonstration planned for the upcoming Hogsmeade weekend, a controlled display of underage magical ability by Concordium members in a public setting, accompanied by release of research showing the developmental benefits of continuous magical practice versus the forced suppression currently mandated during summers. The academic framework is already prepared, Hermione confirmed. 3 independent magical researchers have reviewed and endorsed our findings. The Prophet and International Magical Press have been invited to a student research presentation, without knowing the full content. The ministry will be furious, Susan warned again. They'll revoke the research dispensation immediately. Let them, Harry said with confident dismissal. By then, the international attention will make local regulatory response largely irrelevant. The ICW Educational Committee has already expressed interest in our methods. Once they formally endorse them, individual ministry objections become secondary. The strategy was bold but carefully constructed. By elevating the dispute to international level immediately, Harry would bypass the British ministry's authority while simultaneously demonstrating the Concordium's global relevance. What about the defensive preparations? Draco asked pragmatically. If Reinhardt's warning about others noticing our activities is accurate, we should expect more direct opposition than ministry paperwork. Already implemented, Harry assured him. Potter Manor's security has been upgraded to Fidelius-level protection with additional specialized warding. The chamber's access points have been further restricted and monitored. And each inner circle member will receive enhanced personal protection items by tomorrow morning. He distributed small silver pins similar in appearance to prefect badges but inscribed with protective runes of his own design. These function as both emergency port keys and personal shields, he explained. Activation is tied to your magical signature and triggered by specific intent rather than verbal command. The level of magical craftsmanship evident in the pins impressed even the most skeptical members. Creating intent-based magical items was considered master-level enchantment, well beyond typical Hogwarts education. As the meeting concluded and members departed through separate exits, Harry held Hermione back. You have concerns, he observed once they were alone. About the accelerated timeline. She nodded, never one to hide her thoughts from him. It's not just the timeline, Harry. It's the fundamental direction. What you're describing goes beyond educational reform or even social restructuring. You're talking about completely reimagining the relationship between magical and non-magical worlds. A necessary evolution, he maintained. The current separation is increasingly unsustainable. I don't disagree with the goal, Hermione clarified. I'm concerned about resistance. Not just from the Ministry or Dumbledore, but from magical communities worldwide who have built their entire identity around separation from Muggles. Harry considered this valid point. That's why the approach must be gradual and demonstrably beneficial at each stage. We're not advocating immediate full disclosure, we're creating a pathway for controlled integration that preserves magical culture while allowing necessary adaptation. Hermione studied him with the penetrating gaze that had become more common as her confidence grew. There's something you're not sharing, even with me. Something about how you're so certain this is the right approach. Harry hesitated. Hermione had earned his trust repeatedly, but some knowledge remained too dangerous to share fully, even with her. I have access to certain projections, he finally said. Mathematical and magical models that suggest various outcomes based on current trajectories. The conclusion is unambiguous: continued strict separation leads to eventual catastrophic exposure within our lifetime. This was partially true. The models existed and supported his conclusion. What he didn't reveal was their source, specialized divination techniques from Voldemort's research combined with Slytherin's temporal analysis methods, further enhanced by Harry's own innovations. And Reinhardt? Hermione pressed. Where does she fit into this acceleration? A catalyst, Harry acknowledged. Her appearance confirms that international magical factions are already positioning themselves for coming changes. We can't afford to be reactive. Hermione nodded slowly, accepting his explanation while clearly sensing there was more he wasn't saying. Just, be careful with her information, she cautioned. Grindelwald's methods were effective but often catastrophically destructive to both individuals and communities. Noted. Harry placed a hand briefly on her shoulder, one of his rare physical gestures. Your perspective keeps us balanced, Hermione. Never stop questioning. As she departed, Harry turned to the ancient stone basin he discovered in a hidden section of the chamber, a prototype pensieve predating the more refined versions used in modern times. Within it swirled memories and knowledge extracted from various sources over the past 3 years, including fragments from the Voldemort consciousness he'd absorbed. The acceleration was indeed partly prompted by Reinhardt's appearance, but there was another factor he hadn't shared with anyone, even Hermione. The memories contained a warning: Voldemort had created multiple Horcruxes, ensuring his eventual return regardless of his current weakened state. The timeline for that return was accelerating too, magical signs indicating the gathering of forces loyal to the fallen Dark Lord. When Voldemort returned, not if, but when, the wizarding world would face another war for which it was fundamentally unprepared. Harry's plans needed to be substantially implemented before that occurred. The Concordium had to be established as a viable alternative power structure, not just an educational movement but a genuine community capable of offering protection and leadership when traditional institutions inevitably faltered. The public demonstration would be the first step in openly declaring that alternative. After that, there would be no going back to the shadows of quiet preparation. It was time for the wizarding world to see exactly what Harry Potter had become. The Hogsmeade Village Square had been transformed into an impromptu academic presentation space, complete with demonstration areas, information displays, and seating for the substantial crowd that had gathered. Members of the magical press from Britain and abroad mingled with curious villagers, Hogwarts students, and several ministry officials who had arrived to observe the advertised Educational Innovation Showcase. What none of them yet realized was that this seemingly innocent academic presentation would directly challenge the most fundamental aspect of underage magical regulation. Harry stood at the back of the gathering, watching as Hermione and Theo efficiently managed the final preparations. The inner circle members moved with practiced coordination, each handling their assigned aspects of the demonstration with professional confidence that belied their ages. Quite the production, Mr. Potter. The voice beside him belonged to Rufus Scrimgeour, who had arrived without the usual Auror escort that accompanied him at official functions. His presence as Director of Magical Law Enforcement rather than sending a subordinate indicated he understood something significant was planned. Director Scrimgeour, Harry acknowledged with a polite nod. Thank you for coming. I believe you'll find our research findings particularly relevant to your department's work. Scrimgeour's eyes narrowed slightly. Would these findings happen to relate to the regulation of underage magic? My sources indicate your research has focused heavily on that area recently. Among others, Harry confirmed, neither confirming nor denying the specific focus. We've identified several areas where current policy contradicts available evidence about magical development. Evidence that conveniently supports relaxing restrictions that affect you personally, Scrimgeour observed dryly. Harry smiled slightly. All research reflects the interests of its conductors to some degree, Director. The question is whether the methodology and results stand up to scrutiny regardless of those interests. Before Scrimgeour could respond, a commotion at the village entrance drew their attention. Albus Dumbledore had arrived, accompanied by Professors McGonagall and Snape. Their presence was unexpected. Faculty rarely attended student presentations in Hogsmeade unless specifically invited. It seems the headmaster shares your interest in our work, Harry noted. Scrimgeour studied Harry's reaction carefully. The relationship between your group and Hogwarts administration has become something of an open secret in ministry circles, Potter. Not quite adversarial, but certainly not the typical student-teacher dynamic. Educational innovation often challenges institutional norms, Harry replied diplomatically. Hogwarts has a 1,000-year tradition to maintain. We respect that while exploring alternatives. The carefully worded response revealed little while acknowledging the obvious tension. Scrimgeour seemed about to press further when Hermione signaled that the presentation was ready to begin. If you'll excuse me, Director, Harry said. I believe we're about to start. There's a reserved section for ministry officials near the front. As Scrimgeour moved toward the designated area, Harry noted with satisfaction that the audience had grown substantially. In addition to the expected attendees, he spotted several international magical representatives, including the French and Bulgarian educational attaches, and at least 3 members of the Wisengamot's Educational Committee. Perfect. The wider the audience, the more difficult it would be for the ministry to suppress or dismiss their findings. The presentation began conventionally enough, with Hermione introducing their research group and outlining their general focus on educational improvement. Several Concordium members then presented specific findings on learning acceleration techniques and skill retention optimization, legitimate research that had genuinely impressed academic reviewers. Throughout this initial phase, Harry remained in the background, allowing his colleagues to establish the scientific credibility of their work. Dumbledore watched from the side, his expression revealing nothing while McGonagall's grew increasingly impressed despite her evident reservations about the group's independence. Then came the pivotal moment. Our most significant finding, Hermione announced, moving to the central demonstration area, concerns the developmental impact of magical suppression during critical learning periods. A murmur ran through the crowd as the implications became clear. This was directly addressing the restriction on underage magic during summer holidays, one of the ministry's most stringently enforced regulations. Contrary to current ministry policy, which mandates complete magical suppression for underage witches and wizards when away from school, our research demonstrates significant developmental disadvantages to this approach. She gestured to a magical display showing comparative magical core development between continuous practice and interrupted practice. Theo stepped forward, adding the historical context. This policy was implemented in its current form only in 1875, primarily as a response to Muggle industrialization and increased population density rather than any evidence of developmental benefit. Prior to that, magical children practiced year-round under family supervision for over 1,000 years with no recorded negative impacts. The presentation continued methodically, each point building on the previous ones with impeccable academic rigor. The audience, initially skeptical, grew increasingly engaged as the evidence mounted. Finally, Harry himself stepped forward for the first time. Theory alone is insufficient for true understanding, he said, his voice carrying easily across the square. With that in mind, we'd like to demonstrate the practical implications of our findings. This was the moment of truth, the direct challenge to ministry authority they had planned. 20 Concordium members under 17, including several as young as 13, moved to the demonstration area. Each drew their wand and faced the practice dummies that had been set up. The following demonstration, Harry announced clearly, will involve underage witches and wizards performing magic outside of school, under controlled conditions with appropriate supervision. According to current ministry interpretation of Clause 3 of the International Statute of Secrecy, this constitutes a violation punishable by potential wand snapping and expulsion. A shocked silence fell over the crowd. Several ministry officials half rose from their seats, including Dolores Umbridge, who had arrived midway through the presentation. However, Harry continued calmly, our legal analysis, supported by historical precedent and the original text of the statute itself, indicates that supervised educational demonstration constitutes a clear exemption under subsection 7, particularly when conducted in an all-magical environment such as Hogsmeade. Scrimgeour remained seated, watching with narrowed eyes but making no move to intervene. Dumbledore likewise observed without comment, though his expression had grown significantly more serious. Demonstrators, on my mark, Harry instructed. Standard sequence as practiced. On his signal, the 20 underage students began casting in perfect synchronization, not simple spells, but a choreographed sequence of increasingly complex magic culminating in NEWT-level charms and transfigurations that should have been well beyond the capabilities of most. The crowd watched in stunned silence as 13 and 14-year-old witches and wizards performed magic that many adult observers couldn't replicate. The demonstration conclusively proved their central thesis, that continuous, structured practice accelerated magical development far beyond the standard educational timeline. As the sequence concluded, Harry turned back to the audience. What you've just witnessed represents 3 months of continuous practice under our alternative methodology. These students, previously performing at standard grade level, have advanced approximately 2 academic years beyond their peers. He gestured to the data displays. The full research documentation, including methodology, safety protocols, and longitudinal projections, is available for review by any interested parties. We've also prepared a policy reform proposal for the Wisengamot's Educational Committee that would implement supervised practice exemptions to the current restrictions. The strategic brilliance of the approach now became clear. Rather than simply breaking the rules, the Concordium had reframed the entire issue as academic research with policy implications, backed by irrefutable demonstration and solid legal analysis. The response was immediate and divided. Some audience members broke into spontaneous applause, particularly the international representatives and academic observers. Ministry officials huddled in urgent consultation, while reporters scribbled frantically or dictated to quick quotes quills. Dumbledore remained impassive, though Harry caught a brief flicker of something in his eyes, not anger, as might be expected, but a deeper concern tinged with what almost looked like recognition. As the demonstration concluded and the crowd broke into smaller discussion groups examining the research displays, Scrimgeour approached Harry again. "Clever strategy, Potter," he said quietly. "Force a public reckoning rather than continue the theoretical debate behind closed doors." Harry inclined his head slightly. Sometimes practical demonstration accomplishes what years of policy discussion cannot. "You realize the ministry must respond," Scrimgeour continued. "Regardless of the merits of your research, you've publicly challenged a foundational regulatory framework." "We've publicly demonstrated its flaws," Harry corrected. "The appropriate response would be evidence-based policy revision, not enforcement of regulations proven to be developmentally harmful." Scrimgeour almost smiled. "An admirably academic position that conveniently ignores political reality." "Perhaps political reality should adapt to empirical evidence rather than the reverse," Harry suggested mildly. Before Scrimgeour could respond, they were interrupted by a commotion near the village entrance. A squad of ministry officials in the distinctive robes of the improper use of magic office had arrived, led by Mafalda Hopkirk herself. "Apparently Madame Umbridge didn't appreciate your demonstration," Scrimgeour observed, noting the senior undersecretary conferring urgently with Hopkirk while pointing toward Harry and the other Concordium members. "Acting rather quickly, aren't they?" Harry commented. "Almost as if they were prepared in advance for this specific situation." Scrimgeour gave him a sharp look. "You expected this." "I anticipated potential responses," Harry acknowledged. "Including disproportionate enforcement attempts that would ultimately strengthen our position." The Director of Magical Law Enforcement studied him with new appreciation. "You're maneuvering the ministry into overreaction to discredit the very regulations you're challenging." Harry merely smiled slightly as Hopkirk approached with 4 enforcement officials. The confrontation was about to enter its second phase. "Mr. Potter," Hopkirk announced formally, "as head of the improper use of magic office, I am serving you and your associates with immediate cease and desist orders regarding unauthorized underage magic. Additionally, all participants in today's illegal demonstration are hereby summoned to disciplinary hearing scheduled for next Monday." She handed him an official scroll bearing the ministry seal. Harry accepted it politely but made no move to comply with the implied order to end the event. "Madam Hopkirk," he replied instead, "I believe you'll find our demonstration falls under the educational exemption clause of the original statute, particularly given the presence of qualified adult supervision and the exclusively magical environment. That interpretation has not been upheld by the Wiesengemot in over a century, Hopkirk countered stiffly. It hasn't been properly challenged in that time, Harry corrected. Our legal analysis has been reviewed by 3 independent magical law experts, including a former head of the Department of Magical Law Enforcement. I'd be happy to provide copies. Scrimgeour watched this exchange with growing interest, noting that Harry had effectively anticipated and prepared for every standard ministry response. Hopkirk looked increasingly uncomfortable. Regardless of legal technicalities, Mr. Potter, the demonstration must end immediately. The minister himself has been informed of this unauthorized activity. The demonstration concluded 5 minutes ago, Harry pointed out reasonably. What remains is simply academic discussion of the findings, surely not something the ministry wishes to suppress in a supposedly open scholarly environment. The careful phrasing placed Hopkirk in an impossible position. Ordering the dissolution of an academic discussion would appear heavy-handed and anti-intellectual, particularly with international educational representatives present. Yet allowing it to continue effectively conceded that no actual enforcement action was appropriate. Before she could formulate a response, Dumbledore finally intervened, approaching the growing confrontation with calm authority. Perhaps, he suggested mildly, a more productive approach would be to address the substantive research findings rather than focusing on jurisdictional disputes. The students have presented interesting data that deserves serious consideration, regardless of procedural concerns about the demonstration itself. His diplomatic intervention offered everyone a face-saving middle ground, acknowledged the research while deferring the regulatory question for later deliberation. Scrimgeour recognized the opportunity immediately. A reasonable suggestion. My department would be interested in reviewing the full research documentation, Mr. Potter. The developmental implications could be relevant to several ongoing policy discussions. Harry nodded graciously, having achieved exactly the outcome he'd sought. We'd be happy to provide complete documentation to any interested ministry department. Our goal is improved educational policy based on evidence rather than tradition alone. The confrontation diffused into a more productive discussion, with ministry officials reluctantly engaging with the research findings while avoiding further enforcement threats. International observers, noting the ministry's retreat from immediate punitive action, approached with growing interest in the Concordium's methodologies. As the event gradually wound down, Harry found himself momentarily alone with Dumbledore at the edge of the square. An impressive demonstration on multiple levels, the headmaster observed quietly. Though I suspect today's public challenge was merely the visible portion of a much larger strategy. Harry met his gaze directly. Educational reform benefits everyone, Professor. Surely that's an objective we can share despite our differences on implementation. Indeed, Dumbledore agreed. Though I find myself increasingly curious about the ultimate direction of your reforms. They seem to extend well beyond educational methodology into fundamental questions about magical governance itself. Harry didn't bother denying the observation. Systems evolve or they collapse, Headmaster. History demonstrates this repeatedly. History also demonstrates the dangers of revolutionary change implemented too rapidly, Dumbledore countered. Particularly when guided by those with extraordinary abilities but limited life experience. The implied comparison, to Grindelwald, to Voldemort, to Dumbledore himself in his youth, hung in the air between them. Experience comes in many forms, Harry replied carefully. Not all are measured in years lived. Dumbledore's blue eyes seemed to look through him rather than at him. No indeed. Some experiences transcend normal human limitations entirely. I've wondered for some time now, Harry, exactly what happened that night in Godric's Hollow. Not just the creation of the scar, but the deeper connection it represents. The conversation had entered dangerous territory. Harry maintained his composed expression while inwardly strengthening his mental barriers. A question many have asked, he acknowledged. Though I suspect you have theories beyond those found in history books. Several, Dumbledore admitted. Each more troubling than the last, I'm afraid. Particularly in light of certain resonances I've observed in your magical approach. Techniques and principles that echo those of another student I once knew, though implemented with greater stability and focus. He was referring to Tom Riddle, Harry realized. Dumbledore had recognized similarities in magical methodology but couldn't quite reconcile them with Harry's fundamentally different temperament and objectives. Perhaps great minds think alike in some respects, Harry suggested lightly, while diverging dramatically in purpose and ethical framework. Perhaps, Dumbledore conceded, though his expression remained troubled. I hope, for all our sakes, that the divergence proves more significant than the similarity. With that cryptic comment, the headmaster moved away to speak with Professor McGonagall, leaving Harry to reflect on the encounter. Dumbledore suspected something about the Voldemort connection but hadn't yet assembled the complete picture. His concern seemed genuine rather than simply oppositional, a fact Harry filed away for future consideration. The day's events had accomplished their primary objective, publicly challenging ministry restrictions while establishing the Concordium as a legitimate educational reform movement with international recognition. The anticipated ministry overreaction had been partially neutralized by Dumbledore's intervention, but the fundamental challenge remained in place. More importantly, the demonstration had clearly established Harry's group as something beyond a typical student organization. The level of magic displayed, the sophistication of their research, and the strategic execution of the entire event sent a clear message to observers: this was a movement with serious capabilities and ambitions. As Harry gathered his core team for departure, he noted a figure watching from the shadows near the Hog's Head, Magdalene Reinhardt, observing but not interfering. Their eyes met briefly across the distance, and she gave a slight nod of what appeared to be approval before disappearing into the building. Another player positioning herself on the board. The game was expanding precisely as Harry had anticipated. Phase 4 had begun successfully. The public challenge had been issued, the ministry's regulatory authority openly questioned, and the Concordium's capabilities demonstrated beyond doubt. The next moves would come quickly now, from the ministry, from Dumbledore, from international parties, and possibly from the shadowy others Reinhardt had warned about. Harry's plans included contingencies for each, with multiple paths forward depending on which responses materialized first. The transformation of magical Britain was fully, irreversibly underway. The final confrontation came sooner than even Harry had anticipated, triggered by forces beyond any of their calculations. 3 days after the Hogsmeade demonstration, as the magical press continued extensive coverage of the underage magic controversy, the Concordium gathered in their chamber headquarters for emergency assessment. International response had been even more favorable than projected, with magical educational authorities from 7 countries expressing formal interest in their methodologies. The ministry, meanwhile, had fallen into internal conflict, with the Department of Magical Education advocating for policy revision while the improper use of Magic Office demanded punitive enforcement. The minister himself had made no public statement, reportedly waiting for the Wisengamot Educational Committee to issue preliminary findings on the research. We've effectively created deadlock in the regulatory response, Hermione reported, reviewing the latest intelligence from their ministry contacts. Neither faction has sufficient authority to determine the official position without higher approval. And Fudge won't commit without gauging political winds first, Draco added. Father says he's privately furious but publicly paralyzed. Harry nodded, pleased with this development. The international attention prevents simple suppression, while the academic quality of our research makes dismissal difficult. Exactly as planned. There's something else, Susan interjected, her expression troubled. Aunt Amelia says there's unusual activity in the Department of Mysteries. Something about temporal anomalies and prophecy disturbances. The unspeakables have been in closed session for the past 48 hours. This was unexpected. The Department of Mysteries operated independently from normal ministry politics, focusing on fundamental magical research and monitoring. For them to enter emergency protocol suggested something beyond political fallout from the Concordium's activities. Any connection to us? Theo asked. Unclear, Susan replied. But Aunt Amelia mentioned one phrase that seemed significant. She said they're monitoring something called the convergence cycle with increased urgency. Harry went still, immediately recognizing the term Reinhardt had used during their encounter. If the Department of Mysteries was tracking the same phenomenon, the implications were significant. We need more information, he decided. Hermione, accelerate your Department of Mysteries access plan. We need eyes inside within the next 48 hours. She nodded, though her expression showed concern at the compressed timeline. I'll need additional resources to modify the visitor credentials properly. Authorized, Harry confirmed. Blaze, contact our profit source. Plant the question about unspeakable activities in tomorrow's ministry briefing. Let's see what public response we get. As the meeting continued, coordinating various response strategies, Harry's attention was partially distracted by a subtle change in the chamber's ambient magic. Something was affecting Hogwarts itself, a resonance in the ancient protective wards that surrounded the castle. He extended his magical senses, a technique he developed through years of practice, to assess the disturbance. What he detected was troubling, fluctuations in the fundamental wardcraft, as if some external force was testing its boundaries. Harry. Hermione had noticed his momentary distraction. What is it? Before he could respond, a sudden magical pulse rippled through the chamber, causing the enchanted lights to flicker momentarily. Every magically sensitive person present felt it, a wave of power emanating from somewhere above them. Something's happening in the castle, Harry stated, rising quickly. Something significant. He activated the specialized monitoring array he'd installed throughout Hogwarts, a network of magical sensors that reported to a central display in the chamber. The image that formed showed magical disturbances throughout the castle, concentrated most intensely near the astronomy tower. Reinhardt? Draco suggested, recognizing the location of Harry's previous encounter with the Grindelwald apprentice. No, Harry replied, studying the magical signature. Something different. More dispersed but powerful. He made a quick decision. Hermione, Draco, with me. The rest of you maintain position here and prepare defensive protocols. If we're not back in 30 minutes, implement emergency evacuation. Without waiting for discussion, Harry led his two most trusted lieutenants toward the chamber exit, activating a series of protective enchantments around them as they moved. Whatever was happening above warranted direct investigation, but not without precautions. They emerged from a hidden passage near the grand staircase to find the castle in turmoil. Students rushed in confused groups while prefects attempted to establish order. Several professors hurried past, wands drawn, heading toward the upper floors. Something's breached the castle wards, Hermione observed quietly, noting the pattern of faculty response. Harry nodded, extending his senses again to assess the situation. The magical disturbance had evolved, focusing now on a specific point in the castle, the headmaster's office. Dumbledore, he murmured. Whatever's happening, he's at the center of it. The decision to proceed was automatic. Despite their complicated relationship with the headmaster, any threat to Hogwarts itself was a threat to the Concordium's base of operations and the students under their protection. They moved swiftly through the chaos, using Harry's intimate knowledge of the castle's layout to avoid the main corridors. As they approached the headmaster's tower, the magical disturbance intensified, manifesting as visible distortions in the air itself, rippling effects like heat waves but carrying distinct magical signatures. The gargoyle guarding Dumbledore's office lay shattered on the floor, the spiral staircase beyond exposed. From above came sounds of conflict, magical discharge and voices raised in incantation. Disillusionment, Harry ordered, casting the charm on himself and his companions. Stay close, silent approach. They ascended cautiously, wands ready, until they reached the doorway to Dumbledore's office. The scene inside defied immediate comprehension. The circular room had been transformed into a battlefield. Dumbledore stood at its center, surrounded by a brilliant blue shield of his own creation, facing attackers unlike any they had seen before. Three figures in archaic robes moved with unnatural speed and coordination, casting spells in ancient languages that predated modern incantation structure. More disturbing was the magical vortex forming in the center of the ceiling, a swirling distortion in reality itself that pulsed with otherworldly energy. Temporal incursion, Hermione whispered in shocked recognition. They're creating a controlled time distortion. Harry assessed the situation rapidly. The attackers' magical signatures were unusual, not quite human in their resonance pattern, suggesting enhancement beyond normal wizarding capabilities. Their target appeared to be specific artifacts in Dumbledore's collection, particularly an ancient stone basin that Harry recognized as the headmaster's pensieve. Dumbledore himself was fighting defensively rather than offensively, suggesting concern about collateral damage to the delicate magical instruments throughout the office. Despite his considerable power, the coordinated assault was gradually overwhelming his defenses. We need to disrupt the vortex, Harry decided. It's stabilizing their enhanced abilities. Hermione, counter-rotation spell on my mark. Draco, shield us from backlash. Without waiting for Dumbledore to notice their presence, Harry began a complex casting sequence, one based on Slytherin's temporal warding techniques but significantly modified through his own research. The magic built around his wand in concentric rings of golden energy, a manifestation of controlled power that would have been impossible for most adult wizards. Now, he commanded. 3 spells launched simultaneously, Harry's temporal disruptor aimed at the vortex itself, Hermione's counter-rotation spell designed to destabilize its magical structure, and Draco's shield expanding to protect them from the inevitable energy discharge. The combined magic struck the vortex with devastating effect. The swirling distortion shuddered, its rotation faltering as conflicting magical forces tore at its structure. The attackers immediately sensed the intervention, turning toward the doorway with inhuman speed. Interlopers, hissed one in an accent so ancient it barely resembled modern English. The convergence must not be interrupted. Dumbledore used the distraction to launch his own counterattack, a complex transfiguration that temporarily transformed the floor beneath 2 attackers into quicksand-like consistency. They adapted with disturbing speed, conjuring platforms beneath their feet while the third redirected its assault toward Harry's group. The spell that shot toward them wasn't recognizable from any standard magical curriculum, a coruscating beam of violet energy that seemed to distort the very air through which it passed. Draco's shield, though powerfully cast, shattered upon impact, throwing him backward into the wall. Harry responded instantly, abandoning conventional defense for a technique drawn from Voldemort's darkest knowledge but modified to remove its corrupting elements. He didn't cast a shield but instead created a localized dimensional fold, a temporary warping of space that redirected the attack back toward its caster. The attacker hadn't anticipated this response, taking the full force of its own spell. The impact was catastrophic, its form rippling with unstable energy before collapsing into a swirl of ash and magical residue. Temporal echoes, Hermione gasped in sudden understanding, helping Draco back to his feet. They're not physically present, they're projections from another time point. Her assessment made horrible sense. The attackers weren't contemporary wizards but magical constructs projected through the temporal vortex, explaining their unusual magical signatures and archaic language. Dumbledore, now freed to take more offensive action with Harry's group engaging one attacker, launched a devastating combination attack against the remaining 2. His magic manifested as pure white fire that encircled the projections, constraining their movement while a secondary spell dismantled their magical cohesion. One dissolved under the assault, its form unraveling into threads of golden light that dissipated into the air. The last, apparently the leader, realized the failure of their mission and turned its attention to the destabilizing vortex. The convergence cannot be prevented, it declared in that ancient, distorted voice. What has been set in motion will complete its cycle. With that cryptic proclamation, it cast a final spell, not at any of the wizards, but at the vortex itself. The swirling distortion collapsed inward with explosive force, releasing a shockwave of temporal energy that threw everyone in the room to the floor. When the magical discharge cleared, the attackers were gone, along with any trace of the vortex. Only the physical damage to the office remained as evidence of the assault. Dumbledore recovered first, rising with the fluid grace that belied his apparent age. His eyes found Harry immediately, narrowed with a combination of gratitude and suspicion. "Mr. Potter," he acknowledged. "Your intervention was timely, if unexpected. May I ask how you became aware of the situation?" Harry stood, helping Hermione up while Draco leaned against the wall, still recovering from the magical impact. "We detected the disturbance in the castle's wards," he replied truthfully. "The magical signature was unlike anything we'd encountered before." "Indeed." Dumbledore surveyed the damage to his office, his expression troubled. Few living wizards would have recognized it at all, much less responded with such specific countermeasures. The implication was clear. Harry's response had demonstrated knowledge of temporal magic far beyond anything available in the Hogwarts curriculum or even most restricted magical texts. Hermione recognized the temporal incursion pattern. Harry deflected smoothly. "Our research into magical theory includes historical accounts of similar phenomena." Dumbledore's gaze shifted to Hermione, who managed to maintain a composed expression despite the extraordinary events they'd just experienced. "Remarkable research indeed," the headmaster commented. "Particularly your counterspell, which demonstrated principles I've only seen referenced in certain very obscure texts from the Department of Mysteries." Before the conversation could continue into more dangerous territory, McGonagall burst into the office, wand drawn, followed closely by Snape and Flitwick. "Albus! What in Merlin's name?" She stopped abruptly, taking in the devastated office and the unexpected presence of 3 students. "Potter? Granger? Malfoy? What are you doing here?" Providing timely assistance, Dumbledore answered before Harry could respond. "It seems we experienced what magical theorists call a temporal incursion, a rare and dangerous magical phenomenon." As the professors absorbed this information with varying degrees of shock and confusion, Harry exchanged a meaningful glance with Hermione and Draco. The situation had evolved beyond their calculations, introducing an entirely new variable, direct intervention from what appeared to be magically enhanced beings from another time point. More concerning was the repeated reference to the convergence, the same term Reinhardt had used and the Department of Mysteries was reportedly monitoring. Whatever this phenomenon represented, it clearly transcended normal magical politics and had now directly impacted their operations at Hogwarts. "Perhaps," Harry suggested carefully, "this incident warrants more comprehensive discussion. Particularly given recent unusual activities reported within the Department of Mysteries." Dumbledore's eyebrows rose slightly, his expression revealing nothing about whether this connection had already occurred to him. "A reasonable suggestion," he agreed after a moment. "Professor McGonagall, please ensure the students are safely in their dormitories. Severus, contact the ministry, specifically Amelia Bones rather than the minister directly. Filius, if you would examine the castle's ward structure for any lingering disruptions." As the professors moved to execute these instructions, Dumbledore turned back to Harry and his companions. "I believe we have matters to discuss that go beyond the usual student-headmaster relationship," he said quietly. "The knowledge you demonstrated today, combined with certain other patterns I've observed, suggests you possess information relevant to what just occurred." It was not a question but a statement, and an opening for a different kind of relationship than their previous careful maneuvering. Harry assessed the situation quickly. The temporal incursion represented an external threat beyond their current operational parameters. Strategic cooperation with Dumbledore, at least regarding this specific phenomenon, might be necessary despite their ongoing differences over the Concordium's broader objectives. "We do," Harry acknowledged. "Though I suspect you possess crucial information as well, particularly regarding the convergence referenced by our mysterious visitors." Dumbledore studied him for a long moment, then nodded almost imperceptibly. "It seems circumstances have forced a more open dialogue between us. Once the immediate security concerns are addressed, we shall have that conversation, though I suspect neither of us will share everything we know." "Pragmatic transparency," Harry suggested with a slight smile. focused on the common threat rather than our philosophical differences. Indeed. Dumbledore's expression remained serious. Though I wonder, Harry, if those differences are quite as fundamental as they sometimes appear. Before Harry could respond to this unexpected observation, Fawkes the Phoenix, who had been conspicuously absent during the attack, flashed into existence above Dumbledore's desk, dropping a sealed letter before trilling an urgent note. The headmaster opened it quickly, his expression growing grave as he read the contents. "It seems," he said finally, "that our temporal visitors were not an isolated incident. The Department of Mysteries reports similar disruptions at 3 other locations across Britain, all occurring simultaneously." "Coordinated attacks," Hermione said quietly. "Or a single event manifesting at multiple focal points," Dumbledore corrected. "The convergence cycle appears to be accelerating beyond previous projections." Harry exchanged another glance with his companions. Whatever they had been building with the Concordium, whatever plans they had been implementing for magical reformation, now existed within a larger context of magical disturbance beyond their initial calculations. The game had changed fundamentally. New players, or perhaps very old ones, had entered the field, operating according to rules and motivations that remained obscure. As they left Dumbledore's office to rejoin the rest of the Concordium, Harry's mind was already recalibrating strategies and timelines. The public challenge to Ministry authority now seemed almost peripheral compared to the implications of temporal incursions and mysterious convergence cycles. Whatever was happening transcended conventional magical politics. And Harry Potter, the strange hybrid of innocent child and reborn Dark Lord, found himself at its center, exactly where he had always intended to be. The transformation had begun, but its ultimate direction now included variables even he couldn't fully predict. The only certainty was that the wizarding world as it had existed was already gone, the first casualty of forces set in motion long before any of them had recognized the true nature of the game. The end. Thank you for watching this video. Please be sure to subscribe to our channel and like this video.